we can now begin with Almut, who has joined us. Welcome, Almut Schilling-Bacaflor, who is associate at the Giga Institute for Latin American Studies, where she focuses on environmental politics, business and human rights, regulation and governance of supply chains and indigenous people, with a particular focus on Latin America. She's done wonderful work on participation and accountability in the extractive industry. So welcome, Almut. It's wonderful to have you here. Sorry you can't be here in person. The floor is now yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I would love to be with you, but due to family and health issues, I'm not able to join you in person today, but I hope that we will have another opportunity. And I'm happy today that you invited me to talk about due diligence requirements with a focus on business perspectives, which I think is a very important topic to take into account. I don't know if you can see my presentation.
We see your presentation perfectly, and I think I introduced you as being at the wrong place, and I'm very sorry about that. It says you're at Erlangen, Nuremberg. Apologies.
That's fine. It's actually, I was a postdoc before at the Giga for many years, and now since November, I work as a professor in Nuremberg. So, yeah. But still focusing a lot on Latin America. So I would like to contextualize a bit my reflections and in the broader research that I'm doing on human rights and environmental due diligence. And there, the EUDR is like just one part of a broader policy mix. And together with some colleagues from Sweden and also from the University of Osnabrück, we have been doing research at both sides of global supply chains, on the side of Europe, but then also focusing on supply chains from Brazil and from Bolivia. And we have focused like on different kinds of supply chains. So the French Duty of Vigilance Law, the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, Norway's Transparency Act, the EUDR, and also the recently adopted Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive from the European Union. And we focus like on all the stages of the policy process, from policy making to trying to understand what are the consequences on the ground. And for that, it's still early, but I think we can already see some possible patterns that are unfolding. Yeah, and in my research, I've done field research in Latin America, mainly in Brazil, also in local contexts where crops like soybeans are produced, and also in places where beef comes from, in the Amazon and the Cerrado in Brazil. But also we have done quite a lot of analysis of documents, of how companies report upon risks in their supply chains, what are the mitigation and prevention measures that they adopt. Also looking at trace data, like other people like Philip and Pablo Pacheco, who presented before. And also looking at legal documents and lawsuits about these new laws. And also I'm collaborating at the moment in a project already for some time where we aim to build up a forest and rights observatory in Brazil, because we have seen that data about deforestation are much better and more available and accessible, while it is very difficult to get data on human rights issues such as land tenure and land conflict. So together with NGOs from Europe and from Brazil, we aim to build up like a monitoring system that hopefully will be useful for the EUDR implementation as well. Now, as Jonathan already mentioned before, we see that there is still quite a lot of resistance to the EUDR from many business actors or business close actors, from agricultural ministers in Europe, but also in producing countries like we see here from Brazil. And we have seen that kind of resistance also on the other supply chain regulations. So in general, we have seen that many businesses, so the one who is here with Tony's chocolate was an exception here, but many other businesses really tried to water down the attempts to have stringent regulations in place. And I think this somehow is important to keep in mind when we look at how companies then actually comply with new legal rules, because I think that many companies then have aimed to get like more easy and pragmatic solutions, and or trying to adopt like managerial solutions to their new legal obligations, because very often they are not like fully convinced. And also when speaking like with people from inside of companies, with sustainability managers or compliance people, they have told us in interviews that for them sometimes it's very difficult, like within the company, when talking with the CEOs or the people who are responsible for sourcing of products and commodities, like to get a good understanding about what are their duties and what they really should do, because then there are often many like cost benefit analysis that might work against stronger pushes for more sustainability or human rights protection. And I would like also to tell you a little bit about a study that we have been doing in France before, because France is a very interesting case because it has a human rights and environmental due diligence law since 2017. So the companies have already been obliged to comply with duties, also in relation to deforestation. And so we have been interested to look at how companies really construct compliance. And we made systematic analysis of a sample of companies, mainly from the agri-food sector, working with products from Brazil, and look at how from year to year they report upon their due diligence systems. And also we made interviews not only with businesses, but also with civil society organizations and policymakers. And I think this is interesting because the EUDR obligations will only be part of a broader set of other kinds of requirements and obligations that companies are now facing, and which sometimes it's also very challenging and difficult for the people who are in charge to build up their systems. And what we have seen is that there are quite interesting changes in sustainability management. So we have seen companies that have like really learned to change their perspective, like before thinking about what are the risks that they as businesses are facing, to thinking about what are the risks that they could cause to the society and to the environment through their subsidiaries or their suppliers and their business relationships. And there we have seen, for instance, that companies start to look, when talking about water, not only look at water use in their operations, but also in their supply chains, which has been new for many of them, but also that companies start to build up like grievance mechanisms, not only for their workers, but also like for all people who might be affected, like including local communities in the global south. Yeah, and also strengthening sometimes human rights perspectives within sustainability management. So we have seen like interesting changes over time. However, we saw that also like many measures that are adopted are based like on existing practices. So very often companies are using like the same tools, but mentioning them as evidence for compliance with due diligence requirements. So we saw a lot of use of audits, certification, self-assessment, contract clauses with suppliers. And we know, like based on existing research, that very often these tools, when we look at their effectiveness in practice, they can have many limitations. And then also something that we found very interesting is that there is a kind of a paradox of transparency. So many people from within companies told me that now there are new requirements for increased reporting, and this is now even enhanced with the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But on the other hand, they are often like very careful and very cautious, because they know that if they report like too much, especially on sensitive issues, that the information can be like used against them. So often like people who work on like the legal experts in the companies, for instance, they advise companies to be very cautious with what and how to report. So companies disclose information quite selectively. And it has been very difficult for people like external people like NGOs, civil society or rights holders to get information about sensitive issues. So the possibility to really hold them accountable is somehow still limited. Also, what we saw and what we found interesting is that the companies we have been looking at, they talked a lot about specific issues. So all of them in our sample, they prioritized deforestation, for instance, but there was an absence of other topics that might be very important for local communities, like, for instance, no talk about pesticide pollution or about land tenure violations. So we saw that often companies, they like put in the center topics where there are like good data available, that is like already somehow established and that is easier to monitor, like looking at deforestation or modern slavery lists in the case of Brazil, for instance. And we found that there was an important lack of consultation with stakeholders or rights holders. So when the companies we looked at, when they consulted like with stakeholders, it was usually like big environmental NGOs, but we didn't see like cases where there were like meaningful consultation, like with rights holders from the ground. Like in Brazil, it could be the local communities or indigenous peoples that you mentioned, Maria, before. But then we also saw some interesting changes that had to do with increased reputational and legal risks. And we have seen that this really had led to changes in companies, and this was something that both sides told us, civil society and company staff, that now the companies, they used to take complaints more seriously from civil society because they could come with bigger risks, like reputational risks or legal risks. And also that new constituencies, so new people that before were not getting in dialogue like with the mother companies, they started to approach them, like people from producing sites that are like far away and where before they didn't have any contact, but suddenly they are writing them and asking, okay, what are you doing? We know there is the French duty of vigilance law, but we have this and this problem here. So they ask for a response, which is new. Yeah, but actually something that we heard and which we think it's like somehow worrisome is that companies are doing many things, but they don't have like very clear feedback loops to know what really are the effects of what they are doing on the ground. So people telling us, okay, now we have so many tools, we have the audits and self-assessments, and but actually it's very difficult. The distance is big, the knowledge gaps are big. So very often it's difficult for us to know and to measure our progress. And then that also makes it more difficult for them to explain to their colleagues within the company who are not always favorable to strong sustainability actions, to explain that what they are doing makes sense and that it's really like effective on the ground. Yeah, and now I think something that is interesting and that we will need to have a look at also in the case of the EUDR is how this dynamics of compliance and effectiveness will change due to civil society actions. So in France, we have already 10 lawsuits and additionally six formal notices, which is like the first step before a lawsuit. And several of them, they concern deforestation. 3 of them are on Brazil. And yeah, and now these cases are in front of the courts. We know that winning transnational court cases is like challenging and difficult. There are big asymmetries, but we also saw that in Brazil now there are civil society organizations that are really preparing complaints, and not only to France, but also already working groups that are preparing substantiated concerns for the EUDR. And it will be interesting like to follow how the business perspectives and the systems will change due to these societal pressures. Yeah, and actually Jonathan asked me to talk about supply chain divergence, and I relatively spontaneously decided to talk less about this because I think Pablo and Philip, they already did it. So I thought it's interesting to bring new aspects. So I think this part I will do it rather quickly, like just to say that more or less I agree with Philip and Pablo that there is the risk that companies will try to like find relatively easy solution to comply that doesn't need to have the biggest effect on sustainability. So that there could be this divergence of products that are more sustainable with less deforestation or less human rights problems going to Europe, and other soy going to the, or beef or other products going more to the domestic markets or to less demanding consumer markets. And in research that I did with Myron Bastos Lima, we also found evidence showing that this supply chain divergence, it's already like going on. Yeah, so I think it's a topic that we need to take seriously and to look at like also how to find ways of counteracting this trend of supply chain divergence. And I think my time is almost over, right? Yeah, so maybe I can finish this last slide. Is this okay? 1 minute? Yeah, okay, thank you. No, and then like my last thoughts are about, okay, now we see that companies are using like strategies of how they can comply with legal obligations in a way that doesn't necessarily lead to most effectiveness. So we see some strategies of symbolic compliance or supply chain divergence. So together with Myron, we were thinking what additional policies would be needed. And the first one, that is a very obvious one, but it seems to be very unlikely that this would work, especially in our current context of fragmented globalization. It would be like an upscaling of European rules. So for instance, to consumer markets like China. And yeah, as I said, this would be like a de jure Brussels effect, but it seems relatively unlikely, I think, that this happens. Hopefully I'm wrong. But what is interesting is that there are other processes that maybe didn't get a lot of attention. For instance, in Brazil, there is also law proposals on business and human rights and attempts to hold businesses accountable for environmental and human rights standards. So maybe in some producing countries, we could see similar patterns. And then I think also another strategy would be to attempt to target companies themselves, that they should like harmonize their approach and not use like supply chain divergence as a strategy, but as the whole company commit to zero deforestation and human rights protection. And there we have seen also interesting cases of civil society in Brazil criticizing companies where they see like double standards. And one of these cases would be from Casino Group, where a subsidiary of Casino Group, a supermarket in Brazil, was selling beef with allegedly with deforestation and land grabbing to the domestic market. And their civil society organizations were challenging this and submitting a lawsuit to France. So I think this would also be something interesting to have a look at. And finally, the reflection would be also that it would be important to somehow zoom out from the narrow focus like on specific supply chains and how they could become like more responsible and sustainable, and look at broader landscapes from producing regions, also bring in other actors that are often overlooked in transnational business governance, and think about more transformative ways of for sustainable development and justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Almut, for that wonderful presentation. And I'm going to move to the next speaker, and then we'll have questions in relation to your presentation after that. And the next speaker is Belinda Christine Bork, who is the Global Public Policy Coordinator at Tony's Chocolonely and Chocolonely's Foundation Manager. Welcome, Christine. The floor is now yours. Belinda, gosh.
Absolutely, no worries. I hope, yeah, I can see in your background, Joanne, that you can see my screen. That red first slide always helps in that context. Yes, I am here to tell you a little bit about the approach of Tony's Chocolonely, but I can also add a couple of things from, or actually build on what Almut just presented, because yes, this definitely goes beyond just one company. And I do want to also share a link at the end of my presentation in the chat. So in case I forget that, please someone remind me of this. So first of all, to go a little bit deeper into cocoa, or to do a bit of context setting. So these are the issues in cocoa that we are facing. These are definitely not unique to cocoa, but this is specifically what we are addressing. And these three are interrelated. So the illegal labor, and specifically the child labor, as well, of course, in this context, specifically the deforestation, are both a result of, and with poverty also as a root cause here. So those are ultimately the three aspects that we are aiming to address. None of these are small issues, and none of them can be tackled individually, we think, which is why we have come up with a systemic and quite comprehensive approach. First of all, here you see a summary of our business plan. And what I basically just did is what you see in pillar 1. So we talk about creating awareness. So what are the issues? So what do we actually need to talk about specifically in our high-risk commodity context? Then secondly, and that's what I will share next with you, is leading by example. So what is our solution? And last but not least, inspiring to act. So how can we ultimately make this go broader than just one company approach, and also ultimately, and I'm going to use Almut's words there, of harmonizing across industry. So to go to that level is in our last pillar. So what you can see here is how we are leading by example. We call these 5 our 5 sourcing principles. These 5 need to be applied all together, and none of them can be taken out as a bite-sized cherry picking here, but we really say this is the comprehensive basic approach that is needed. And there's also more or less an order too. So we do say that the first aspect of this is traceable beans. So that kind of sets the foundation and is the groundwork that needs to be done to then actually implement sustainable measures. So first to kind of know where the cocoa is actually coming from, and then follow up with sustainable action. As sustainable action, we have multiple aspects in here. For example, paying a higher price for cocoa, that's the monetary aspect of poverty, for example, as well as working with strong farmers. In this case, we mean cooperatives. So also the pooling of resources, economies of scale that come into play here. Another very important factor that comes into play for all 3 issues as well is the long term. So to actually have comprehensive plans that do solve issues on the ground, such as deforestation. It can't just be a season by season dip in, so an annual kind of overview, but there needs to be a longer and more strategic and comprehensive plan, which is why we work for a minimum of 5 years with the cooperatives that we work with. That is from our side or from the company side. Should the cooperatives not want to continue a contract, which we call an asymmetrical contract, they can drop out on a seasonal basis. On top of that, last but not least, we have quality and productivity in here, because of course there is also a certain aspect of increasing the yields from the existing farms, because also that can work against further deforestation. And in that context, we also do look a little bit at reforestation and basically the planting of shade trees, the rejuvenation of cocoa trees, and the minimization of use of pesticides as well. I will get back to that overview, so don't worry if you feel like you have more questions on that. There will be a more detailed one in a second. I am, however, jumping back or forward to that slide because I want to quickly go into that 3rd pillar before I dive deeper into what we do on deforestation, because I think it starts at the moment of saying this is something that we apply, but it shouldn't just apply to us. And this is also one of the reasons why we are such big advocates of the EUDR, because we do believe it is needed, and this is a crucial next step that needs to be taken to create ultimately a level playing field. The way that we have been going about this already until now is Tony's Open Chain. Tony's Open Chain is an industry-led collaborative initiative where we are coming together as companies, and what we're trying to achieve is the thinking of sustainability, especially in producing countries, needing to be pre-competitive. That means we share a cocoa supply chain with competitors on the supermarket shelf. Quite concretely, that means you might see a Tony's bar in a supermarket, and right next to it, you might see, going to use the Dutch example for now, an Albert Heijn chocolate bar next to it. So the two compete on the shelves for customers, but the cocoa in these bars, or that is used for the chocolate in these bars, is produced in the exact same way according to the exact same standards of the 5 sourcing principles you just saw. Having this as the idea is what we're trying to achieve. That also means that we're not only reliant on the one company, Tony's Chocolonely, to be successful and to be liked by clients and customers, but we can go broader because, as you can see here, we already have a quite wide array of companies being signed up to this initiative. So you don't see all 18 here on, we call them mission allies on the slide, but you see an overview of the different ones that already have signed up. And there is obviously also, with legislative initiatives coming up, a lot more interest in this, because all of these 18 companies do sign up to the 5 sourcing principles that you again see here, just in a different design, because I'm now talking about Tony's Open Chain and not only about Tony's Chocolonely anymore. And we do approach this together. I want to quickly look a little bit more into what stands behind these sourcing principles in the context of EUDR. As you can guess, or I've already hinted at it for this last sourcing principle. So in that context, it's quite immediate what can be done. But actually, I would say the most important one, and where most of the work also for us goes into working on EUDR compliance, lies in that first sourcing principle, so in the traceability. Because actually, in the traceability, which is something that we've been doing since 2012, which, by the way, was a time when we were laughed at for trying to achieve supply chain traceability, because we were simply told that it cannot be done. As we can see nowadays, 12 years later, this is not only something that can be done. Now, luckily, governmental developments demand it to be done. So we're just waiting for the same to happen on the higher price now. But the background to that is that we distinguish in 3 forms of traceability. And you see an overview of these different 3 forms here. All 3 of them play a role in the context of the issues that I showed you in the beginning. I will focus less so on the social traceability for the sake of this presentation, but also in that context, again, the issue of child labor just being present, so undeniable. What we need to do in that context is, and that links to what Amos was saying about the reporting, it's not about hiding the child labor cases, but it is about reporting transparently on the child labor cases that we definitely do find in our supply chain, and then solving these cases. So very much on the forefront of being transparent about the issues and then finding solutions to those. As a quick side note, we have been publicly addressed about having child labor cases in our supply chain, and our response was yes. As you can see in our last report, that's what we're doing on it. So we do believe that is the future of how companies should go about their transparent reporting. More specifically, in the context of EUDR, what becomes relevant here is the operational traceability. So that's very much the direct bean flow that we're talking about here. And you see a simplified visual of this as well. So what are we tracking, ultimately speaking? We are tracking a combination in the so-called bean tracker that is built on Chainpoint technology. This is a software where ultimately, from the moment that the cocoa beans are being submitted to the cooperative, so our direct business partner here, if you remember the strong farmers sourcing principle, the moment that the beans arrive via the farmers at the cooperative, that amount is going to be registered in the system. From there on, we have a checks and balances system going on. That means that at no additional point, so a small example, 63 kilograms are being submitted at cooperative level. That means at the following stop, for example, at the local warehouse, it can't just suddenly be 70 kilograms. So we already have a checks and balances system in place there. Additional information that we have in the bean tracker is a farmer code. So that means the deliveries can be linked back to a specific farmer. That helps with the premium payments that link to the higher price. In addition, however, what we also have in there is yield estimates and also the farm sizes, which brings me to the second part here, which is environmental traceability. That means that what we see in the bean tracker is not only the deliveries that a farmer has made, but we can also see how close this farmer is to basic maximum or 100% of their yields. So that gives us an additional idea as to whether or not it is possible from the farm size they have to deliver that amount of cocoa. Again, a security check to kind of make sure that the cocoa actually does not come from protected areas. The actual check on the size and the GPS mapping of the farms comes in the form of environmental traceability. What you can also see here in a simplified version What we do in this context is we map all farms with polygons. So since this season, we are on 100% polygon mapped. So we've also moved on from centroids there in the past. We're going beyond EUDR here. So that also applies for farms that are smaller than 4 hectares, because we do believe that ultimately we do need that for all farms. But great if I talk to you about approaches. Of course, you also do want to see a little bit on solutions or achievements and results in that context. That's what you can see here. So I'm going to start again with the less relevant part for this, so the social part. What we see overall is that we see child labor going down massively. So technically in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, it is currently, unfortunately, 1 and 2 children. So every other child in cocoa is in child labor. We see this go down at our long-term partner cooperatives to 1 in every 22 children. So that is massive progress and something that we can be very proud of. And in that context, it also is not uncomfortable at all for us to share that this is still an issue, but very much something that we want to raise awareness around and that we want to make people aware of the solutions of how to solve this. Now a little bit on the KPIs that stand behind the operational and environmental traceability. So in total, we track 11 cocoa-related non-financial KPIs in our reporting. And we have one of them that, as you can see, you see here an overview of the past 3 years. That's required by our third-party audit, but we can actually go further back in time for this. And we do track here whether there's 100% of the bean volumes that we have used that can be traceable back, can be traced back to the Tony's Open Chain partner cooperatives. So that is one of the KPIs that we get third-party audited by PwC. Another one of the 11 is the GPS mapping and the assessment against protected areas. So also in that context, on the one hand, what we do assess is the data quality. So what has come in for the data mapping exercise, but also how does that square against forest maps? And again, aside from showing you that the mapping exercise is complete and for the sake of transparency, I want to show you what that actually looks like. So we have done this very thoroughly, and we've done a quite deep assessment, land use change analysis together with diligence. What you can see here as a cutoff date is the Rainforest Alliance deforestation cutoff date that we are using. So also not the EUDR one. We go further back. But actually, we've done the exercise and conducted it back to 2001. So we have those data points as well. And what we can see here is that 99.96% of Tony's Open Chain supply chain is verified deforestation free. On the one hand, it depends on who you ask and what their background is. I remember the market team was very unhappy with the fact that they couldn't shout about 100% in this context. I must say I was, from a reporting point of view, very happy about this because 100% would seem highly unlikely. So this is a way more realistic number to present to you here. And what I actually want to talk about in that context is, okay, so what happened? So what are we talking about here that keeps us from the 100%, and what are we doing about this? And that is in numbers, so because percentages tend to then become a bit abstract. So instead of talking about 0.04%, I'm going to talk about those 12 farms that were deemed non-compliant out of the 29,236 farms. And what we're doing in this context is, and what we have done since the land use change analysis was conducted and completed by Intelligence, the first thing is we're doing ground truthing. And ground truthing has been deemed as this extensive exercise that is impossible in scale and cannot be done. But if we're looking at it here, we conducted this land use change analysis for nearly 30,000 farms, and we had to go to 12. That seems a very reasonable approach to check on 12 farms. And what needs to be done then, and that's where the quality of forest maps also needs to be guaranteed, is, for example, one of the risks or one of the reasons why some farms turned out to be non-compliant is because, according to the forest maps, there was a straight line of the forest border, and therefore certain farms might have cut into it with like little knobby shapes actually at the top. Turns out that actually the farm itself was following the flow of a river, and that was the actual border of a forest. And therefore, these farms were actually ultimately compliant, just not according to the governmental forest map that this overlapped with. So this is an absolutely perfect example as to why ground truthing is absolutely crucial and needs to be checked in this context so that farms are not being excluded. That is also probably my biggest mantra for the second part of what you see on the slide here, because one of our big worries in the context of EUDR is that what we're looking at, and that also fits to what Almut was already saying regarding where other supply chains might diverge to. We are worried about the exclusive supply chain that is being created, about the farmers that are possibly being left out due to this legislation coming up. And this is not how this can go. So there needs to be an inclusive approach to it. And this is also very much what we are working on, for example, in the context of the forest loss risk index that we have set up also with Intelligence, in that context where we identify the farms that are at risk, so that are either close by or are most likely to be in a protected area or cause deforestation. And what we're going to do in that context, and what we have been doing over this year as well, aside again from direct visits, so you can see 0.2%, we're again not talking about massive amounts here. What is also relevant is to have a certain risk-based approach, in the sense of we prioritize those farms. So those ones are the first ones per cooperative that we are dealing with, that we can react early on to any issues that might come up in that context.
Belinda, can I ask you to begin to wind up, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Here we are.
Perfect.
And I will stop sharing and put the link in the chat, because one thing I do want to emphasize is that this is not only Tony's Chocolonely, and this is this specific approach is Tony's open chain, but there is a massive call from the cocoa industry to implement EUDR, and there is a public statement out there with a lot of pretty logos at the top, and that is worth reading as well, and I will put that in the chat. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and with perfect timing. So because Belinda has to go, as I said, we will have 10 minutes for questions and then move on to our final speaker. Irena online would like to ask the first question.
Try to unmute myself. Belinda, what you're doing is fantastic. I have just one question. You mentioned child labor. You identified some cases of child labor. You are aware that under EUDR, basically the products that come from the farms that use child labor are non-compliant. Did you discuss this with the Commission? How is it going to be addressed? Because it would not be fair not to allow these products onto the market starting from the 30th of December.
Yeah, really nice question. And I think in general, an issue that we also do approach, for example, with the forced labor regulation that is also currently under discussion at EU level. So yeah, what we keep on emphasizing in that context is, again, it can't be about exclusion. It needs to be about the realization that this is just a fact, and that we need to look at remediation measures and comprehensive remediation at different levels. So what we emphasize specifically is that there is individual remediation, household and community level remediation measures that need to be considered. And again, we're taking a common stance there also via the Cocoa Coalition. So definitely something we keep on pushing for.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions? Thank you, Jamila.
Yes, hi, Janina Graps. Thank you so much for your presentation, both of you. A question to Belinda as well. You mentioned that as a company, you've been working on this since 2012, I think. If you look to your competitors that are a little less advanced, how likely do you see it that they will be able to match this type of ambition and progress within the time frame of sort of the transition period? And as a second question, I guess there's a sub question, what would you advise them to do? And sort of like as a second question, how scalable do you think that your approach is in terms of volumes? Like, could you grow your company to twice as big and still pursue the same approach?
I love the reference to twice as big because yes, that's currently what we're aiming for over the next year as well. So yes, the approach is definitely scalable, as we've seen based on the companies that we keep on adding. So Tony's Open Chain was only started in 2018 with back then 1 mission ally. Nowadays we are at 18. That's not that long ago. So the approach is definitely scalable, and I think that also links me to the answer to the first question, because I think one very crucial part in that context is, of course, this now requires a lot of systems and procedures set up. And I think a crucial part there also is to remember the data ownership. So because this is a mapping exercise, the GPS mapping that needs to be done, that can happen at co-op level. So ultimately, because there is multiple companies that source from the same cooperatives, so the cooperatives should be the ones who own the GPS mapping data, and then they can provide the company with that, which then ultimately can lead to generating due diligence statements and submitting those into the information system of the EUDR. So a huge part of that for us is definitely enabling the data ownership and the data authority of ultimately the people who also do these exercises. So it can't be company independent and not happen in silos, but we should find that as the common denominator and enable that from a skills perspective, but also support that financially.
So we have 4 more questions. I'm going to take them in groups of 2, and then did you have your hand up, Kunhao? So, and I'm going to have to ask all question askers and our speaker to be very brief, because otherwise we won't have time for the last speaker and the questions. So, Dante, I'm just going to take a couple more online first. So, Almut and Jolene, first of all.
Okay, thank you very much. This is really very interesting to listen to your approach, which is very different to what I have seen with many other companies. I would have a question in relation to social traceability, because there on the slide you just put that you use like community facilitators, and if you could say a few words more about how they are doing their work, and then also if you use other tools like additionally like grievance mechanisms or in situ visits, or I don't know, other kinds of data that you are using, and if you think, or I would like to ask you like how you think that like human rights assessments could be done in a better way, like where we could get data, what you think is needed, what is a good approach. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Almut. Jolene?
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks, Belinda, for that amazing presentation. My family is a big fan of Tony Chocolooni's, so kudos to the work your company has done. My question, I'll keep my question brief. A lot of what we hear about, businesses trying to do the right thing is that often it's sort of a grudging compliance. It's a very managerial approach. Tony Chocolooni stands out as a real exception. From your experience with the Tony's Open Chain, what are some suggestions or lessons you might be able to share with us about trying to create entry points or inspire points of inspiration to get other companies to go on board or to do things similar? Thank you.
Nice. I answer
Belinda,
those two.
highlights
Absolutely.
only.
Absolutely. Community facilitators employed by the cooperatives, so directly part of their teams. There's a gender balance approach in the teams and also an age balance approach to it. All households are visited every year. Happy to share the report for all the details on the CLMRS, and otherwise also happy to talk further about it. The CLMRS system is a wonderful one. There's loads of complexity to it and it works really well. Regarding the TOC pitch, or ultimately not only, I don't think that only counts for cocoa, but I'm going to use the most recent, I think it's from 2 or 3 days ago in the Wall Street Journal. Waitrose joined Tony's Open Chain, and their latest sales numbers speak for themselves ever since for the chocolate that is now being sourced via Tony's Open Chain. So I would say let's beat them with sales numbers, because we can show that it is working not only for Tony's Chocolonely, which is massively growing, but also for other mission allies that are joining. And Waitrose via Wall Street Journal recently is the most recent example.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to go to Obed and then Jonathan and Kunhao, who are all going to be extremely brief. Welcome, Obed.
Thank you very much. And Belinda, thank you for your presentation. I'll go straight to my question. I see that Tony is doing a very good work, but to what extent are your data sources and your information consistent with national processes? For example, in Ghana, the Cocoa Board has taken the initiative to map farms, and the Forestry Commission is also providing the forest cover maps. To what extent is the data that you are using consistent with the national data that is being supplied by these national stakeholders? Thank you.
Am I allowed to answer, or we're collecting both?
I'm going to collect a couple more and then give you the final word.
Hi, Belinda, Jonathan Zeitlin. We've been corresponding. Thanks for the very inspiring presentation. I wanted to pick up on the point that you made at the very end of building alliances beyond your company, if I understood correctly, also beyond Tony's open chain. An interesting feature of COCO is that already before the EUDR, at least in West Africa, there were a number of calls by coalitions of multinational companies and NGOs or civil society organizations for some kind of legally binding voluntary partnership agreement with the EU, which would underwrite the environmental and social sustainability standards that companies were trying to develop. So I guess my questions would be, to what extent do you see what you're doing and the EUDR as an outgrowth of those kinds of concerted approaches? And what do you see as the obstacles? I mean, in terms of bringing other companies on board? That's in a way something that was already asked.
Thank you, Jonathan. And then Kunhai, the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Kunhai. Maybe I have a questions for Almut. You mentioned about the occurrence.
If your question is for Almut, we'll just keep it, because we'll ask questions. Many people will have questions. So Belinda needs to leave, so we'll just let her address the questions to her, and then we can move on. So Belinda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, regarding the national traceability systems, really good question. So what we're aiming for is we basically, the way the Tony's Open Chain team is structured is we have a team in Amsterdam, but we equally have a team in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, and the counterparts. So there's different data analysts. So one sits in Amsterdam, but he also has counterparts in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And first of all, to have the data ready to be plugged into a national traceability system is definitely on their radar and amongst their tasks. We've definitely also considered and are looking into what we can recommend regarding such a traceability system to look like, and are happy to support in any way. So we will, for sure, the moment that there is a functional national traceability system, plug into that one and not be precious about our own system. So the moment that becomes broader, that is the only logical approach forward. And that's definitely how we will go. So it kind of links back to what I said in the beginning about sustainability cannot be the competitive advantage in a product context. So this is not something that we're using as our plug to sell more cocoa, but that needs to just become, ultimately a nationwide / also region-wide approach. So we would definitely do that. Regarding the obstacle, I would say links to what I said before about the pricing, so the sales in that context. Of course, sustainability does cost something, and that is definitely something that I think has led to certain investments maybe not having been made in the past. So we call these our impact investments overall. And this is a rough exercise that we've done a couple of years ago. So the exact percentages might be now fully outdated. But so we invest around like 8%, I think it was at the time, of our net revenue into impact investments. So into setting the system up, but also keeping it running. If we look at basically what a lot of other bigger chocolate and cocoa companies are doing. Usually their sustainability investments were about 0.5 to, I mean, I think I'm going to be optimistic and say 1.5%. I think if we meet somewhere in the middle here and we were to say, let's all invest around 5% of our net revenue, which is still very little, considering the massive amount of profits that they are making, into sustainability, I think that would bring us a long way. But I think so. The question or the direct answer would be, I think still the cost of sustainability is seen as an issue. The solution to that is there just needs to be an investment, and it doesn't need to be a major one. It can be in the single-digit net revenue percentages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have you here. I will never forget the name Chocolonely now. So, and it's really a pity you can't stay with us for the rest of the day. But thank you so much for joining us and answering all the questions. You can see how much interest there was. And I'll pass over to our next speaker. And Belinda, I'll just let you leave at your leisure and depending on your next engagement. So thank you very much again. And our final speaker in this panel is Stefano Savi, who is also online. Welcome, Stefano. Stefano is the director of the Global Platform for Sustainable Rubber, which is an international multi-stakeholder program, the mission of which is to lead improvements in socioeconomic and environmental performance in the rubber value chain. It's wonderful to have you here, Stefano, and the floor is now yours. Your screen is shared. We can see it well.
Yeah. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you to the EUI for the invite and having me here. I know we're a bit behind with time, so I'll try to keep it very brief and hopefully below the 15 minutes that I was allocated. Anyways, I think a lot has been said by the speakers before me, by Almut, by Belinda, and the great presentations. So Global Platform for Sustainable Natural Rubber is what we're looking at, and this is because there's two different types of rubber, actually, and not many people know. There's synthetic rubber that comes as a byproduct of fossil fuel production, and there's natural rubber which comes from different type of saps of different type of plants, but especially from the tree called Hevea brasiliensis, which you can see in the very fake plantation that I actually have behind me on my video. So I'll talk a bit about the natural rubber value chain. I'll talk about the work that GPSNL is doing as an organization, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we see in the EUDR, and also what we are doing as an organization in respect to the EUDR specifically. So before I go into that, and for those of you that are not very familiar with the value chain and with natural rubber is a product that is present in many end uses, but especially in tires. 70% of the natural rubber produced globally goes into tires. So you use it in your cars, in the tires that you use, especially in your cars. This said, while this production of tires is concentrated in quite a few players, I mean, in very few players, tire makers, which are household names, which we might know, like Michelin and Bridgestone or Goodyear and Pirelli and others. The production of natural rubber, 90% of it comes from smallholder farmers. So from small farms that are operating in the tropics globally, but especially in Asia, and where farmers normally have about 1 to 2 hectares, so 2 football fields maximum of land each. So you have more than 6 million farmers, producing natural rubber that then gets processed, which actually is a very simple process. It's like a washing machine, because the rubber, when it comes out of the trees, is exactly as you would like it. The problem is that it gets contaminated with leaves and other materials. So when it gets conglomerated, then you need to separate it again, shred it and wash it, and then cook it together and ship it to the factories. And there are 500 of these factories. So there's a huge number of collectors and dealers in between. In countries like Indonesia, where the supply chain gets very, very complex, you have as many as 7 to 10 links between the factories and the farmers. And so this is just to show the complexity of the value chain when we look at this commodity. So there are several problems that come with the production of natural rubber. There's some positives, of course. I mean, natural rubber is ultimately a renewable product, at least when it's maintained as natural. It's more difficult than when it's mixed to have really a product that is fully recyclable, let's say, but not going into that. The challenges are both environmental, social, and economic, So in periods of high prices, when people want to expand production of natural rubber, we have issues such as deforestation and land grabbing, really staining the reputation of the industry. In periods of low prices, as we've seen in the last 10 years, though, it's low income for farmers and living conditions of farmers that are really the problems that are more present in the supply chain. So this is why GPSNR, the organization that I'm representing today, that I work for, was set up 5 years ago. It was set up to find a collaboration for some of these issues that are, I think, as Belinda was mentioning before, are difficult to tackle unless you have collaboration and unless you have several players in the supply chain working together to look into this. The issues of prices, the issue of deforestation, especially when linked not to egregious behavior but to smallholders' operations, are very difficult to tackle from a single company perspective. So you can see here some of our members. We have members that are throughout the value chain of natural rubber, from smallholder farmers, of which we have more than 200 from 12 countries, to end users and everything in between, and civil society organizations that are part of GPSNR. All the companies that you see here commit, when they become members of GPSNR, to having policies that are in line with our policy framework. So there's 8 different aspects in this policy, ranging from environmental to social and economic aspects. I won't go in detail into that, but if you want more information, I'll be able to provide you with the link, so you can look at our website. It's pretty easy to find. And we're now setting in place an assurance model that is based on risk and on due diligence that we plan to launch from next year, for which we will check the operations of the companies and allow companies to make claims on the basis of the audits on their operations. So when it comes to the EUDR, what is the impact on the rubber value chain? Well, first of all, I'd like to start with some opportunities that I see. There are opportunities from the environmental side. I do think that the EUDR has been a revolution, really, in rubber. It's been a revolution, first of all, because it happened very quickly and suddenly. Rubber was one of the last commodities to be added to the regulation just in December 2022. And I do think that it has been a wake-up call for many in the industry, when this happened. But I do think that regulations like this, while they represent a revolution, and revolutions are not what changes things for the better. It's how you rebuild after the revolutions that is very important. So I think it's going to be good in terms of the environment for the deforestation checks, especially on the operation of egregious actors. Deforestation coming from companies that are operating illegally or at large scale on deforestation. And I do think there are opportunities in terms of rewards for sustainability coming from the traceability that it's coming from the EUDR. On the social side, we see already that work on land tenure formalization is increasing, both collectively and from companies directly, especially in countries where traceability maybe is not so much of an issue, but issue with the legality and permits has been difficult to address in the past year. Checks on illegal operations. And what I like to say always is this idea of traceability for engagement. So companies ensuring that they have traceability not to exclude actors that are not operating at the level that is expected, but to engage with actors to improve conditions. I do think, and we're seeing this already, that also on the economic side, EUDR is bringing some good opportunities in terms of securing better and longer term contracts for farmers, and also in seeing better prices. Thailand is a good example of this. We have seen the operation of the rubber authority and the presence of EUDR compliant rubber already in the market, achieving prices that are 30 to 40% above market price for now. But let's see if that will be the case for the long term. Yeah. This says I see also some risks coming from the EUDR. On the environmental side, there's, and I don't know if everybody has thought of this, but I do think that there's a risk of deforestation, increased deforestation from the EUDR, especially in the context of natural rubber. Why is this the case? Because the farmers that are more difficult to trace and those that will likely be excluded from serving the European market because of this regulation are usually the farmers that are more far apart from the supply chain in Europe, and usually closer to forest frontiers. So my worry here is, what are these farmers gonna do when their products are not bought for these premium markets? They're gonna start getting a sub-premium, so they're gonna make less money with the same amount of land. And what do farmers do when they get less money with the same amount of land? They usually open up another hectare to plant cassava or to plant subsistence crops. So I think this is a risk that we need to look into. Yeah. On the social side, I do think that customary and native land use rights not being recognized in some countries from a legal perspective might risk further exclusion and further issues in terms of land tenure formalization. I do think everybody has a role to play, though, in ensuring this doesn't happen. Another thing is on the living and working conditions of informal workers. We see in natural rubber, in many cases, workers being coming from different countries, from the countries where they're operating in, and many times being not in possession of legal permits to work. Sometimes preferring not to have a legality status when they work. And I do think that this might create some challenges, yeah, especially when these farms are supplying global supply chains that are going to have more and more controls. On the economic side, well, there's a risk of smallholder exclusion, yeah, and the creation of the two-tier market, which I hope is not going to be the case, and I hope it's going to be mitigated by policies like the EUDR being present in other buying countries more and more in the future. The possibility of worse prices for smallholders, I mentioned it before, especially for those that are not going to be able to demonstrate their credentials. They might be compliant, but not be able to demonstrate this, at least for the beginning. And one last issue that I would like to mention is the fact that traceability is one of the tools that we have, yeah, that are part of what forms the bouquet of sustainability, yeah. And focusing on traceability might mean less money and less funds for the other aspects of sustainability, such as capacity building or working directly with farmers, that I think are very important. I agree very much with what Belinda was saying. I think investment need to go up, but not only on traceability, on all the aspects of what we're looking at. So I'll close with my last slide. What are we doing in GPSNR to address specifically the work related to the EUDR? There are three areas I would like to say where we're working. One is risk, one is traceability, and one is support for farmers especially. So on the areas of risk, we have come up with legality studies. As you know, the definition of and legality scope has not yet been defined by the Commission specifically for the different countries. So we're trying to do this and work ahead of what is going to come up. We have already produced and published 2 studies for Indonesia and for Thailand that we worked on with the European Forest Institute, which you might know as having been the secretariat basically for the voluntary partnership agreements under the timber regulation. Yeah. And we are producing 2 more studies for Vietnam and Malaysia. We are also looking broadly at national ESG risk assessments, so not only on the scope related to the EUDR, but for 3 countries. This is in the context of our assurance model work. On traceability, we have produced a traceability guidance for suppliers, which has been now under public consultation in the last month. We're closing this up, but you can still find it on our website, at least the version that was for public consultation. And as I mentioned before, we're working on an assurance model, and this assurance model will have mandatory targets for traceability for companies for the next years, which are beyond serving just the market of the EU, but are looking at the global scope. Last but not least, in terms of support, we have already started working on capacity building. We have projects that are touching now several thousands, more than 10,000 farmers across different geographies, thanks to funds coming both from institutional donors and from our companies. And we're now moving to a system that we call the shared investment mechanism, where the funding will solely come from companies to support capacity building at scale for smallholders. And this will be done on the basis of having a contribution for each ton of natural rubber that is sourced by these companies going into this fund. So I'll stop there. I hope I've managed to almost go below the 15 minutes, and I'll pass it back to you, Joanna, and ask me any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stefano. Your timing was perfect and it was extremely interesting. So now we have nearly 25 minutes for questions for both Almut, who is still with us online happily, and for Stefano. And I'm going to start with Kunhao, who has a question for Almut.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. So my questions for Almut, that you, in your presentation, in the last few slides, you mentioned examples of de jure and de facto Brussels effect. It's very useful to look at this due diligence legislation from this perspective. So I'd like, would you say a few more words on the examples that you term de jure or give rise to de jure Brussels effects? That what kind of roles is the Chinese companies or the Brazil companies that in your examples, that what's the role of these multinational companies there that give rise to the Europeanizations of these rules? And so what's the difference between the examples you choose for de facto and de jure there? Would you say a few more words on it? Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed. My question goes to Stefano. I would like to ask Stefano if you see EUDR may lead to more destructive activities. I just give an illustration like rubber smallholding in Indonesia is dead, already dead. This is because of oil palm. Because the price is much better, and then the smallholder replace rubber with oil palm. But another with the EUDR, potentially oil palm also the price is not so good, because smallholder cannot enter into the market, and then it is also a trend that the farmers replace explore new commodities like Pablo mentioned this morning, cassava, maize, even more. This is the case of social forestry in Indonesia, that the land, the state land granted to the local communities, that the farmer previously planted coffees under the trees, but right now they replace the coffee with maize and cassava. So it is also potential that EUDR lead to more destructive activities.
So I'm going to, first of all, thank you, Ahmed. I'm going to first of all turn to Almut to answer Kunhao's question, and then to Stefano to answer Ahmed's question.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Like when Myron and we wrote the article about EUDR, and we looked at if there is a Brussels effect, we used the theories and concepts of Anu Bradford, who has looked at the Brussels effect in different policy fields, and we applied her theory and concepts to the supply chain regulations, not only the EUDR, but also. And she distinguishes between de jure and de facto Brussels effect. So de jure effect would be like when other countries beyond the European Union would adopt like similar laws. So this would be the juridical field, when we see like either diffusion of norms or upscaling of norms. So upscaling could be like still there are the negotiations about the treaty on business and human rights, where environmental issues are also included to a certain extent. This would be an example, but it seems like quite unlikely that this happens, I think, because of the geopolitical tensions that we see, that it seems difficult to get a consensus like on such rules, I think. But I think we see in different countries like similar efforts of people talking about similar approaches. Like in some Latin American countries, we see that civil society or certain political parties, they have also law proposals for adopting similar laws to either regulate supply chains or empower like victims and give access to remedy. And in Brazil, we have such a law proposal on business and human rights that somehow is quite similar to the logics that we see in the European Union. So this would be the de jure effect. And de facto would mean that even though maybe another country doesn't have the same law, but that de facto still, because of multinational companies adopting this legislation because they still want to sell their products to the European market, that they start to adopt the laws and give it de facto effectiveness in what they are doing. And we somehow saw that, for instance, with environmental and social standards of traders, that COFCO, for instance, the Chinese trader, like in the beginning, they had very low standards, but then quite rapidly they were like confronted with quite a lot of critique, and then they adopted like similar standards than the other multinational traders. And I think if there are like double standards of certain traders that use specific standards according to the consumer market where they deliver their product to, then this could be like challenged and criticized. And if there is like naming and shaming campaigns, for instance, or if investors pressure them, that there could be like a de facto Brussels effect that would still be interesting, because these, like we know that the corporate concentration in these global supply chains of forest risk commodities, they are very concentrated. So a few companies could have a lot of influence for changing the structure of the sectors.
Thank you so much, Almut. And we will pass over to Stefano.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, terima kasih for the question. I think it's a very, very challenging question that you pose. Yeah, there's very different aspects that link to it. You were right, for example, in Indonesia, the volume has gone from 3.4 millions to 1.9 millions in the last few years. Yeah, so this is before the EUDR. How the EUDR will impact on this, and if there's the impact, if we can see the impact net of the effect of the EUDR on how the market is going to react, it's going to be very difficult to see. Yeah. What I'd like to say, though, is something that I mentioned in the presentation before, is that the EUDR has been a revolution for rubber, but it's not the revolution that changes things. It's how you react to the revolution. Yeah, how do you rebuild? You know, in the case of normal political revolutions, is how you rebuild. Yeah, how you rebuild the government, how you rebuild the institutions. And I think here is how you react to this legislation now that it's a done deal. Yeah, we see governments and companies that have decided that this was a done deal a few years ago, or for rubber 2 years ago. Yeah. And they started working on this, and now they are prepared and can respond to it. And where we see a better ability and opportunity to keep smallholders included in the supply chain. We see other countries and other actors in the supply chain, corporate actors, that are still thinking that this might not be happening. Yeah, that might be retracted. And if it will be happening, I don't think they will be prepared. Yeah, and for sure we will be seeing negative consequences out of that. So I do think that the learning that we can take, there's a couple of learning that we can take from this for sure. One is that I think if you take things positively, you can find solutions. I remember in rubber when we started 5 years ago, people were saying traceability was impossible. Yeah, and it's something that I believe also Belinda mentioned. Yeah, and now we see that. When you have to do it, you do things. Yeah, you can do it. So this is a great testament to what we could do if we have the will. Yeah, And the second learning I would say is that I do think more dialogue with civil society and in between governments and between different actors is important, because the signals of this type of change have been here for many years. Yeah, the demand for change, for sustainability has been here for many years. And if we were prepared to willing to listen to each other and to understand what would be a global level playing field, we won't be discussing now, what are we going to do in 6 months with smallholders when the EUDR come to effect, because it's too late. It's just too late.
Thank you so much. And so we'll move to the next round of questions. I take Irina online first.
Thank you. Stefan, I have a question for you, which you might not know the answer, but you might be aware. You've mentioned that you have 6 million farmers worldwide, as far as I understand, and 500 factories worldwide as well. I would assume that by now only a certain percentage of these farms are covered by geolocation mapping as well as legality studies. And I would assume that these 500 factories would still for years to come process both compliant and non-compliant rubber. And the processing at the rubber factories plant, as far as I'm aware, is a continuous process. So you either need to have a separate machine, a separate set of equipment to process compliant rubber and non-compliant rubber, or you need to stop the process, clean out the production equipment and load compliant rubber. The stopping of the process is very costly in terms of energy, I would assume. Has there been any thought on this? How do you know? Okay, thank you.
So it sounds Go ahead, Stefano.
On the first question, I do have the data, but I'm not at liberty to disclose yet. But I'll ask you to keep your eyes open on a report that is going to come up very soon from the European Tire and Rubber Manufacturers Association on the impact of the EUDR on natural rubber. I believe there might be a slight shortfall in the availability of EUDR compliant rubber, but we're not so far from the demand that Europe is requiring. The issue is that this is happening because rubber is being redirected, that is compliant, to the market, right? So that we're not creating new EUDR compliant rubber. Well, that's an issue, because it means that the situation is not changing. You're just spending money to sort out things mostly, And this is actually the second answer on the factories. What I understand is happening is that there are going to be factories that are going to be focusing on EUDR compliant rubber and factories that are not going to be focusing on this, And so it's just a shifting of material. No one in their sane mind would change a factory processes to have two tiers. We've seen this in many supply chains. Even for certification, this doesn't usually happen, When you start having a percentage of material that is certified, for example, you switch the factory and you process 100%, because the cost of, if you ask any factory manager, they would never accept to change things in that way. It's always much less costly to just source 100% of whatever you need to the standards you need to comply with.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
So technical non-divisibility of standards and the de facto Brussels effect, maybe Kunhang. We have Janina, then Maria, then Claire, and then Pablo, and then we go back to the speakers and we end.
Yes, thank you. Janina Grabs. A question to both speakers. Do you see that the preparatory activities in the sectors that you work in or study tend to focus on these pre-competitive activities, such as was explained as necessary to really achieve compliance at scale by the representative of Tony Cioccoloni? Or do you see also competitive dynamics emerging where companies are not sharing information, trying to be the first and maybe only few to be able to provide compliance in order to then sort of capture market access?
Very much. Maria?
Yes, thanks, Savi. Very interesting presentation. Very encouraging to see that your organization is already building capacity among small farmers and is aware of this challenge. or is doing something about it, actually. My question is, do you see anything that the EU could do in the implementation process in order to support these efforts and to avoid exclusion of small farmers?
Thanks, Maria. Claire.
So this is for Stefano. Thanks so much for this fascinating presentation of your platform. Two quick questions. So I noticed that when you put up the members of your network, that the civil society affiliates were all what I would call environmental NGOs, or what we would usually think of as environmental NGOs, which would seem to fit with what people have criticized earlier today in the EU Deforestation Regulation, that it's too environment focused and not enough human rights, indigenous communities focused, and so on. But then what I found most intriguing was that despite that, when you looked at the opportunities, you were looking at social, you were looking at economic. So I guess my question to you is, are those environmental NGOs, in your view, becoming advocates and experts for labor, social, economic, and also for indigenous community voice? So are they changing? Are they becoming a new kind of worker representative, I guess we could say? Then my second question is also about the design of the EUDR and the design of your organization. So you're obviously a very impressive commodity-specific organization, but the EUDR has obviously got a cross-commodity, multiple commodity orientation. So I was just interested in whether your platform reaches out to the other platforms in the other commodities in the addressed by the regulation to like share best practice or co-mobilize or whatever. Thank you.
And if you could just pause for a moment, Stefano, we go to Pablo.
Yes, one more question. I think rubber is a quite interesting sector, and you talk about the benefits and opportunities and risks. So the obvious question is, if you think that the opportunities are going to outweigh the risks, probably yes, under some conditions. And you also talk about the need to increase investments in the sectors for getting ready, be prepared. And since we can ask you anything, so do you have a sense about how much is that funding gap to get ready? And if you're optimistic that you are going to get those resources?
So we're going to close the session by giving the floor to both Almut and to Stefano. So Stefano, you go first while I try and get everybody back on the screen, and then we'll turn to Almut.
Okay, quite a few questions. Yeah, on the competitive, pre-competitives, yes, of course. We have seen competitive behavior coming in many times, and it's very difficult to herd cats, yeah, because that's what you do when you work with many companies. So that's something that we live with, but that's the nature of collective action. Yeah, you will always have that because businesses are designed to win on each other, yeah, and that's in their nature. So we are trying to go against the tide, but I do think we've made some strides, yeah, and you can see it in the collaboration that's coming up, and the more people realize that the value of something is not just the monetary value, the more you look at the externalities that are coming, the more collaboration is essential, because you cannot deal with that on a company by company perspective. On what the EU can do to not exclude farmers was another question. I think Article 28 is very clear, and for rubber, I really hope that we're going to see something like the cocoa talks that were organized for cocoa and have been going on for a long time, and something like that coming up in rubber and in other commodities. I think we need more dialogue. We need more understanding and collaboration between the governments and Europe if we want to be successful on this, because the creation of national traceability system, for example, it's a great step towards ensuring that smallholders are not left behind. And for this, there will need to be funding and technical support, yeah, from Europe to be able to achieve the goals of this regulation. On the question on the NGOs, we do actually have social NGOs, but it's been a challenge that we have identified as a key target for GPSNR from the beginning, because we did only have environmental NGOs. So my personal work has been in the last years to go and dig out social NGOs that wanted to join the platform. And I'm happy to say from last year, we have Windrock International that has joined, and Save the Children that are part of GPSNR now. But you're right. I do think that increasingly there is an understanding that that protecting the environment does not go with, not hand in hand with protecting people. I mean, wages, and livelihoods have a huge effect on how forest is utilized and how deforestation rates are affected in the countries where we're looking at these problems. So we have many of the organizations that, on paper are environmental organizations working with indigenous people and local communities and working on conservation with farmers, on projects that go beyond just the environmental aspect. On the cross-commodity work, definitely. I mean, you will see a press release actually this week. GPSNR is one of the 5, I believe, maybe we're 6, I need to check on that, don't quote me, but commodity multi-stakeholder organizations that are working, for example, on a risk information alliance to come up with a standard on definitions on how to define risk and how to address risk in the value chain. And we've had several exchanges with many of the standards, RSPO on palm, Preferred by Nature, or Rainforest Alliance, or FSC, and others. Some in Timber that are also our members on the impact of the EUDR specifically, but on other works as well. On the question from Pablo, I believe, on opportunities versus risks, I'll go back to the example of the revolution. I think it depends on how we deal with this. Yeah, it's we have the future written in front of us. There's two, those opportunities and risks are the possible future we want. If we decide that we want one, we will have it. If we decide we want the other, we will have the other. So it depends on what we choose. I don't think there's a difference. And how much is the funding gap? I'm a big believer that if we solve the issue of living income, we would probably solve every other issue in sustainability, very likely. Yeah. So it's easy to say that. It's not easy to say what is the price of commodities that would reflect on a living income. But if you look at the living income, is really a lot of money. Yeah, a lot of funding is missing. And the biggest issue is that if you want to achieve living income for farmers, you need to remove the 1 billion people that are in extreme poverty in the world that will always be willing to substitute the poorest farmer at the lowest market price. Yeah, because that's the issue that we have today. So I don't think we can solve an issue in rubber, in sustainability, or in cocoa, in sustainability, or in other supply chains if we don't ultimately solve the issue of poverty globally, because that's what's bringing the prices down. That's what's bringing the living income down for farmers. So not an answer, maybe a bigger problem, but.
But a very, very useful perspective. Thank you so much. And I'm going to give the last word to Almut if she has any final answers or comments before we close.
Thank you very much. Janina, thank you so much for your question. I think it's a difficult one, and I don't have an easy response to it, like to what extent companies are preparing like the grounds for effective regulation, or to what extent they are like holding back things because they want to have competitive advantages. Like from my talks with many companies, I got the impression that most of them right now, they see more the risks that the new regulations bring, and they try to avoid to be targeted by reputational risks, by legal risks, supervisory risks, like all or investors even. So I got the feeling that most of them are quite cautious in what they do and don't see so much, like at least from my conversations with many like sustainability managers and compliance managers, they don't see it so much like, okay, we want to be like the front runners and to get like positive reputation. I think many rather said that right now there is not so many like incentives, like it's not such a visible topic if you are doing the things like in a better way than the others. Then the other way around, that if you like make a mistake and you don't respond, that you might get like publicly like shamed. And I got the feeling that more companies are like afraid and yeah, like try to respond. But I think there are not so many like who are so proactive than Tony Chocolonely, for instance, who really then say, okay, we have modern slavery or child labor in our supply chains and we make a step forward to do the things differently. I didn't see so much of that. I think we see differences between companies and some try to be more on the front, like initiating things. But then also often they care more about their own brands and there they try to get competitive advantages. But in the other products in their supply chains, I think it's still more the defensive reaction. But I don't know, it would be interesting to look at it more closely and study it in the future. Yeah, thank you.
So it's been another really wonderful panel, and thank you very much to our three speakers. We now have a half-hour coffee break, or nearly half an hour, so we'll start back at 4 o'clock. And I'm very excited about the next session, which is on civil society and producer country perspectives. We've already been talking a little bit about that. So I look forward to welcoming everybody back at 4 p.m.
The last session of what has been a very full, and for those of us who've been able to be here all day, a very exciting, but also somewhat exhausting day. And so now we're going to conclude with a long session on civil society and producer country perspectives. We have 4 speakers. I'm going to introduce them all at the beginning. 3 of them are online. We're going to start with Julia Christian, who is the Cocoa and Forest campaigner for FERN, which is, I would say, the leading EU-based forests NGO. And Julia is very active not only as a campaigner, but is also I would say, prolific writer of very excellent policy studies and papers for FERN, the latest one, which is on traceability systems and how to design them for EUDR compatibility and to get the most out of the EUDR. Was published by FERN last week. You can find it on the FERN website. Our second speaker, who has already been following the sessions and has been active in the Q&A, is Obed Asu Adai, who is co-founder and managing campaigner at EcoCare Ghana and a member of Forest Watch Ghana. He has been active working both on timber legality and sustainability and the flagged voluntary partnership agreement in Ghana, but also on cocoa issues. And so we'll take the 2 of them in sequence. And then our third speaker is with us physically is Ahmad Maryudi, who's professor of forest policy and governance at the Universitas Gajah Mada in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. He has also been an editor of the leading journal, Forest Policy and Economics, and he runs a forest research institute at his university, and he publishes very widely on different aspects of forest governance, especially in Indonesia, and has worked, I would say, primarily, well, or very extensively on issues related to the Indonesian timber legality assurance system, the SVLK, its extension into sustainability, the PAPL system, but also on issues of forestry and deforestation more generally in Indonesia. And our final speaker, who I think is there, sitting next to Julia in the window, is Mardi Minangsari, who's president of Kum Telapak, which is an Indonesian forestry NGO. She's also had a long-term collaboration with the Environmental Intelligence Agency. She has been, I think, the chair, or at least very active in JPIC, which is the civil society, or one of the main civil society monitoring platforms for the Indonesian timber legality assurance system. And she's also been very active in campaigning for reform of the Indonesian sustainable palm oil certification system. So we have a mix of people with all of whom have some expertise on the situation on the ground in West Africa and in Indonesia, and who bring both a civil society and a producer country perspective. In Ahmad's case, also, of course, an academic perspective. So what I think we can do, I mean, maybe it would be sensible just to break up the what will otherwise be a 2-hour-long session, to have the presentations by Julia and Obed, both of which are cocoa related. Then we can have kind of round of questions, and then we go to Ahmad and Mardi, and we can talk about Indonesia and timber and palm. So, Julia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Should I share my screen, or do you have my presentation?
Yeah,
Okay, I can do
share
that.
your screen. Have we
Great.
made her a yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. Great. So I won't only talk about cocoa, actually. I'm going to talk about, kind of cross-cutting stuff. I do have more experience personally on cocoa, but Fern works on various commodities, and the paper that we've just put out on traceability systems has a specific focus on cocoa, palm oil, soy, beef, and timber. So yeah, it's not just about cocoa. So I've called my presentation Implementing the EUDR in a Socially Just Way. I think this is still a dream. I don't think it's the reality at all. So I will, that's what I'll be talking about in my presentation but I think, I think there are things that can be done about this. So I will focus a lot on making some concrete proposals for how this aspect can be improved. I want to, before doing that, just zoom back into why did the EU pass this regulation? Maybe you've already talked about this earlier today, but I think because we can get very wrapped up into this is so much paperwork, and this is so much, why did we have to do this? It's not necessary. I think it's important to remember why we have this regulation and why civil society has campaigned for it in Europe. So the reason for that is, one of the big reasons that it's a major deforestation from agriculture specifically is a major source of carbon emissions. If it were a country, tropical deforestation, it would rank third, just behind the US and China. And 90% of that tropical deforestation is from agriculture. So that is the major problem that this regulation is trying to contribute to solving. Sorry, not clicking through properly. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and of this, the EU is the world's second biggest contributor. So China's the biggest, the EU is the second biggest. That's why we felt that it's important for the EU to take responsibility for the biodiversity loss and land grabbing and carbon emissions that's being produced by tropical deforestation from agriculture. So we actually have some quite updated data, which I wanted to share about what are the actual countries and commodities where this sort of EU footprint on tropical deforestation is happening. I think this is actually deforestation as a whole. It's not just tropical deforestation. So the latest figures that we got back from Trace, and that's looking at 2019 to 2021, is that, and this surprised me, Côte d'Ivoire is actually the biggest contributor to EU-driven deforestation, and cocoa by far is the biggest. I'm surprised by these figures because I always think there's no forest left in Côte d'Ivoire. A lot has been destroyed, but this is what this data is telling us. So I think that's important for us to see. A lot from coffee from Côte d'Ivoire. Soy from Brazil is actually less, but still major. The second biggest one appears to be palm oil from Indonesia. First biggest is cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire. Second biggest is palm oil from Indonesia. Third biggest looks like it's actually cocoa from Ghana. Fourth biggest is soy from Brazil. And then fifth biggest looks like it's cattle from Brazil, followed closely by palm oil from Malaysia. So, I mean, from Fern's perspective, those are the main countries where we have been really focusing in on. So I think, you know, it shows that that's still relevant. But yeah, it's definitely some surprises in terms of how important cocoa is. And I think that does make things complex because that is a sector where most of the production is being done by smallholders. So I don't think that you can tackle the issue of EU-driven deforestation without looking at some crops that are grown predominantly by smallholders, which are then part of an industrial agriculture system, of course, bought by massive traders like Olam, etc. But they are being produced by smallholders, and that creates some specific sort of social justice sort of difficulties, I would say, and challenges, because it's hard to impose regulation on small farmers, as I'm about to go into. And just to, I mean, to be clear, the regulation technically is not on small farmers, it's on big companies, but of course the compliance cascades, you know, up the supply chain to the farm. So it does have implications for small farmers. I'm sure Obed is going to talk about that further. I just wanted to summarize some of the criticisms that we've been hearing of the EUDR recently from different sides. We hear concerns about smallholders, not always from smallholders, sometimes from companies, but which I think one is that geolocation is too difficult. Another is that smallholders will lose market access. Another is that smallholders will end up, or their cooperatives will end up bearing the costs of complying with the EUDR. Then we have a set of concerns that are coming from EU member states. They're saying the regulation should be delayed. Some people are saying it should be reopened completely, changed everything. They want a minimal threshold that we hear from the Agri Commissioner, the EU Agriculture Commissioner, that there should be a minimum threshold introduced of 0.5 hectares. Due diligence is too much work for European farmers, they say. They also complain the benchmarking is not ready. They say no member state should be high risk anyway. We should all be low risk. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, things that are quite infuriating to hear from European actors. And then finally from companies, they are saying, well, the information system isn't ready, the benchmarking isn't ready, we want the benchmarking to be ready. So these are the kind of, this is the nature of the criticisms that we're hearing at the moment. Our take as Fern is that yes, yes, a lot of these concerns are real, but we still believe that traceability and geolocation are key. And I do think that if it's done in a certain way, it can be good for smallholders. I think it's an opportunity. It's also core to the regulation. I think if you were to take out this element, it is the difficult element. It's what everybody's complaining about, but it is what will allow the regulation to have a positive impact, not only on deforestation, but also on things like transparency, payments, negotiating power of farmers. The key to unlocking the power of the regulation is in geolocation and traceability. So I don't think you can do away with that. And I think we should be wary of any sort of loopholes that are created in those requirements, because it would really compromise the effectiveness of the regulation. And to be more specific, I want to quote from a position statement that was sent by a big grouping of Ivorian cocoa farmer cooperatives and NGOs in 2022. I found this fascinating. I had not really thought about this before, but I've also spoken about it in person to these people, and yeah, I found it really interesting. They wrote a statement in 2022 expressing support for the traceability requirement in the EUDR, because they said they hope that it would help to tackle, and this is a quote, the non-payment of promised sustainability premiums and of the official cocoa price set by the government, the existence of illegal cooperatives that purchase cocoa produced in protected forests, the failure to control the number of farmers, the government's lack of knowledge of the number of cocoa plots, but above all, the existence of numerous intermediaries along the supply chain. And in particular, what they were hoping was that the EUDR could help them push their government to finally finish the national traceability system, which is something they've been wanting since before the EUDR was even a thing, and which they want in order to tackle these issues of kind of corruption and sort of mispayment and mismanagement within the Ivorian cocoa sector, which they are suffering from. So I think it's important to highlight that like opacity of supply chains is also something that really hurts small farmers. That doesn't mean that like all all attempts to address opacity are going to benefit farmers in the same way. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So this is a however. So we do still think this is the right approach. However, oops, sorry, I need to move this little bar. Implementing EUDR will need much more support than there is currently. And many of the concerns raised about smallholders are real. I think I'm convinced from having seen someone do it that actually geolocating a small farm is not difficult. If you can have an app and you just walk around the farm, it would take maybe 20-30 minutes, but it does require a smartphone and it requires internet connection, which many people don't have. Then this is maybe the more difficult part. The cooperatives must manage this data, and this can be much more expensive. And there's been a recent study put out by Commerce Équitable, Fairtrade France, and EDF, Ivorian NGO, which really breaks down what these costs actually are. It's very useful. I would recommend everyone to check it out, and I can send it to the organizers to send around if you want. But yeah, the main costs for cooperatives are the sort of data management, and then also ensuring the physical segregation of cocoa that is deforestation free versus not deforestation free. This can be expensive. And then also complying with the legality criteria under the EUDR can be more difficult. So I think this is the whole area of like costs that I think at the moment in many cases are falling on the shoulders of cooperatives. I think in terms of whether or not smallholders will be excluded from EU markets, I think this depends on the sector. I think in cocoa it's unlikely because there's just so much of the production base is by smallholders that there isn't really the option for companies to just develop a sourcing model that is smallholder free. I think, although Minang can and the other guests from Indonesia can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that currently most of the palm oil imported into Europe is not produced by smallholders. So I don't see how the EUDR would create much further exclusion risks. They're already excluded, but it would, it could be a barrier to them excluding it in the future. On the other hand, other smallholder groups sometimes see it as an opportunity to gain access to the EU market, which they don't currently have because they have done the traceability. So I think it's, and in coffee, I think there's more of a risk because it's more of a mix of production by smallholders and non-smallholders. And, we are hearing sounds that companies are preferring to source from bigger production areas. So I think this risk seems to be highest in coffee. Like I said, I think that our take is that the answer is not to not do the regulation or the geolocation or the traceability, but to provide much more support. And unfortunately, although the situation is improving a bit and slowly, the EU has been very late and very inadequate in providing support to smallholders and producer countries. So in a nutshell, I think we've written a lot about this, as have many other people. But what should that support look like? I will highlight a few things in terms of process and then a few ideas in terms of content. What we've been saying and many of our partners have been saying for a long time is, yeah, the EU needs to negotiate partnerships with major producer countries that have a lot of exposure to EUDR, and particularly with a focus on those that have a lot of smallholders. So yeah, that's Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Ethiopia, Colombia, Cameroon, those sort of countries. And then two actions that could be done right away and should have been done already. But, the past is the past. Let's just do it now. Is they should conduct a comprehensive EUDR readiness needs assessment for each of those producer countries, conducted together with actors in producer countries to identify really what are the gaps. And then a targeted and funded plan should be developed to respond to the needs flagged in the assessment. Again, developed together with producer country actors. It seems quite obvious, actually, but it's not really been done. And then in terms of content, this will really depend on what comes up in the process. But some ideas that I can have from looking at the cocoa context is that it would be really useful to have an on-demand fund, which smallholders and cooperatives could just access directly and easily to just get money to set up this traceability system stuff and like do the polygons, set up the IT systems, and just keep it simple. Like this would be really, really useful. Of course, the information needs to be given in the first place about the regulatory requirements. This hasn't happened. Oh dear. how badly, and it says it all on the slides. So, you know, just read the slides. And then another thing in the short term would be to support, make what's.
Was that me? I don't think so. He's still there.
She's
Okay.
muted. Yeah.
How is it now? I'm sorry about this. I'm using my phone as a hotspot because I don't have good connection here.
Okay. We can hear you now. We
Okay.
can no longer see your slide.
Yes, I will put it back on. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
You can see it now? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think the core conclusion of our traceability systems paper is that a really priority action which should be for the EU to really support and incentivize, create more positive incentives for national or state level, but basically government run traceability systems in producer countries. And we think this is a way to addressing a lot of the challenges in EUDR implementation. Another idea that I've you know, has been put forward by this recent stimulus tax, either at the EU or the producer country level, where you would kind of give tax benefits to sustainably produced goods and then penalize unsustainably produced goods, and then try to funnel more money towards to compensate the efforts of people who are producing sustainably. But yeah, this is just a sort of idea. Finally, I just want to share a bit, go into a bit more detail on what we're recommending in this paper on traceability systems, because this is kind of a key of how we think some of these challenges can be addressed. There's a QR code which links to our report in case you want to read the whole thing. This is the one Jonathan referred to that was just published last week. And basically what we recommended there is that in order to support EUDR implementation, the EU should be supporting a stepwise approach to traceability, where in the short term, all the actors are working towards establishing elements of interoperability, like developing consistent data sharing protocols that explain how data should be presented to make it interoperable, sharing data sets between companies and the government, and sharing costs, developing a mechanism for companies to contribute to the generation of data by the producer government. And then companies can also improve their own internal systems to meet these 10 criteria that we've set out here. But we basically said the EU, all actors should support ultimately, you know, where it's desired by the producer government and where it's planned. The aim should be to work towards nationally owned or state level systems in producer countries that have these 10 criteria that sort of guarantee robustness, credibility, but also transformative impact on the ground. And everybody has a role to play in doing that. Obviously, the producer governments own the systems, but the EU can support them financially and technically. They can take account of them in the benchmarking that they're doing. And then, you know, farmers have a role to participate in running the system and inputting farm data. NGOs have a role in monitoring, and companies should financially contribute. And I wanted to share also why we think public traceability systems are the way to go in EUDR implementation. And that's because, yeah, it's more efficient to have a single nationwide system, especially for smallholder farmers. I think it's concerning to think of lots of companies each asking cooperatives for similar data, but presented a different form each time. This is really inefficient, especially if you have limited resources. Also, a nationally owned system is more likely to track information that's relevant and useful for people in producer countries, like payments and prices. Then thirdly, a government, you know, if there's an instance of deforestation or illegal logging that is captured, you know, a traceability system that's run by the Forest Agency may well, as it does in Ghana with the wood tracking system, trigger an action by the government to go check out what's going on and, you know, stop it. Whereas a company traceability system will just try to exclude the bad behavior from the supply chain. And then finally, this is a major point, the company traceability systems, which they're developing under EUDR, are completely unable to check for illicit double counting of volumes. And so, I mean, I won't go into it because it's too technical, but I'm assuming many people know what I mean. But it's, unless you have an overview of how many times a farm polygon has been used, by who and for what volumes, there's no way to really prevent that a company claims that a certain volume is coming from a polygon, but it's actually coming from somewhere else. like in order to prevent that, you need to have a full oversight of what's happening in the territory. And that's why, again, sort of nationwide, or at the very least, like big jurisdiction level systems are better than lots of individual company systems. I think that I will stop there. I can explain more about these criteria for a good traceability system, but if you want, but I think I'll just leave it there for now, and leave it to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia. I think there will be a lot to discuss. I'm hoping your connection will be better when it doesn't also have to support showing slides. Okay, so Obed, let's take you now, and we'll have the link to Coco, and then we can have a round of Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for inviting me to this very interesting conversation. And yes, I joined in the morning and in the afternoon to listen to some of the interesting conversations that we're going. And thank you very much for inviting me. I don't have slides to share because I have come to understand that having a conversation is more relevant than projecting some points. Sometimes people they over focus on the points on the slide, and they don't listen to the explanation that you give. So I will limit myself to speaking on some pointers that I have here. Maybe I'll start by probably reiterating some of the points that Julia has made, and that in principle, for us producer country civil society organizations and NGOs, we in principle support the EUDR, and I think I really want to make that point very clear. I know that in recent times there has been a school of thought, or people have come up to talk negatively about the EUDR, but for us, civil society and NGOs, when we look at the benefits, the long-term benefits of the EUDR as against the short to medium-term challenges that it brings to smallholders and to the supply chain, we think that in the long run, the EUDR has very important outcomes that, if they are able to implement it effectively, will support the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in the long run. So that's, I really want to put that across. And again, we are in support of the EUDR in principle because it protects the environment. And you might be living on Mars if you don't know or have not seen the catastrophic effects of climate change on us. And so on that score too, we support the EUDR, that it will in the long run protect the environment and protect the climate, which will also support the microclimate in producer countries that will inure to the benefit of smallholders and producers. So on that score, we also support it. Probably the last point of support is the fact that we, and this is where it gets a bit controversial, when we started the conversation around the EUDR, we were also of the opinion or of the belief that the EUDR will safeguard the rights of local communities and indigenous people. And by safeguarding the rights, it was also, we're looking at living income, access rights, and all those bundle of rights that with the passage of the EUDR and its implementation, some of these topics that, especially in producer countries like mine, are not really discussed at the forefront will come to the table for conversations, nationwide and international-wide conversations on some of these issues that will entrench the rights of local people and indigenous people. But I mean, later on, I will come back to that point. We are becoming a bit disappointed in some of the things happening, and it appears that reason for supporting it might have been a bit far-fetched. Having made those points, maybe what I will go to or speak about is why some of us were a bit skeptical about the EUDR and the reasons for our skepticism. And we had issues with the EUDR from the beginning, some issues basically based on two key areas: the approach that the EU was using to develop the EUDR, and then the structure of the EUDR. These were the two fundamental challenges that we had producer countries. And on the process-wise, again, about 17 ambassadors of the EU, ambassadors of producer countries to the EU, pinned a letter to the EC at the twilight of the passage of the EUDR, expressing concerns about the fact that producer countries have been alienated, though they have not been adequately involved in the processes leading to the passage of the EUDR. And that is very, very important. That is a sharp contrast to what happened with the flagged VPA processes. And just as Jonathan said, I am a student of the flag process, so I always want to compare and contrast some of these issues. In the EUDR processes, we saw that it was mainly based in the EU, and producer countries were not really involved. Some of the reasons given was that it is an EU law, and that producer countries are not really required to be part of the process. But we also know that when you look at the side effects or the impacts of the implementation of this law, you realize that those who will be worst affected are smallholders in producer countries. So on that score, we thought that it would have been very, very important to get producer country governments on the table and for them to buy into the regulation so that they can be the best advocates of the regulation in their countries. And I will talk about that when I come to the implementation challenges, because in Ghana, we are seeing the side effects of that particular process-wise, the failure in the process that led to the development of the EUDR. On the structure itself, how the EUDR was structured, the problem, once again, taking lessons from what happened with flagged VPA, was that we saw that it's only been developed as an EU regulation with no concrete accompanying mechanisms in producer countries. The closest we have come to that is the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative program that is being run by the various delegations of the European Union in the various producer countries. But that falls short of what we were looking at. What we were looking at was a framework that will have an EU regulation with its accompanying mechanisms in producer countries that will go to the core of the problems that the EUDR seeks to resolve, i.e. issues of deforestation rights, issues of human rights, issues of living income, so that you will have in-country processes addressing those problems through a multi-stakeholder implementation process. We didn't get that. What we have gotten is an EU regulation that is going to be implemented whether we like it or not. But what they have attempted to do is to do a targeted support system for producer countries, which is not enough, And I will speak to some of the reasons why it's not enough. So the fact that it became a purely regulatory approach at the EU level is one of the bottlenecks that we are seeing in its implementation form. Now that we are implementing, we are seeing why and how having only an EU regulation and not having its accompanying support systems in producer countries was a wrong approach. Having said all this, of course, we also see some opportunities in the EUDR, especially for conservation NGOs like myself and my colleagues who believe in the fact that there's a need to protect the environment. We see opportunities in there. Some of the opportunities we are seeing is that there's opportunity for us to strengthen our laws, in-country laws. Unfortunately, because there isn't any accompanying measures to push this process forward, we are having to do it on our own, and it's becoming a problem. I can always use Ghana as an example. Cocoa Board law, or the law that sets up the cocoa and regulatory structure, is over 45 years old, and there hasn't been any revision of it. And right now, as we speak, there is no political will to revise them. Go back about 13, 14 years ago, we had a similar problem with the forestry sector. But when the flag DPA and the EUTR was introduced, there was political will of producer countries to come to the table to try and address some of the fundamental legislative and regulatory challenges in producer countries like Ghana. And we have seen, at least I know that for the EU and those at the DG Environment, they don't see the essence of those governance reforms. But for us in producer countries that have been part of the process, that governance reform element of the FLEG VPA is very, very important. And it would have been very, very crucial for the cocoa sector, especially in Ghana, in that the cocoa sector is politically dominated and with no space for a lot of multi-stakeholder engagement. So having that kind of accompanying in country would have been very, very useful. Yes, those are some of the opportunities. And of course, we were also looking at an opportunity of improving farmer livelihoods through the CSDD that was to accompany the EUDR. But once again, we were our hopes were dashed when at the very last minute, and we saw that some of the very, very important countries in the EU were relenting on pushing forward with the original CSDD document, but rather they were looking to water down some of the requirements in the CSDD. So those are some of the opportunities in the EUDR that we saw as producer countries, civil society organizations, and why we were very enthusiastic about it. Now I want to go into the implementation approaches that are being used and some of the bottlenecks that are coming. I will start with the first one, which is currently, and most of the time when we're talking about cocoa, we are comparing Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. When you look at Ghana, the approach being used by Ghana to want to be able to meet the requirements of the EUDR has become problematic because in one breath, they are seeking to use the ARS, the African Regional Standard that they have developed to meet some of the requirements of the EUDR. In other breath, they are seeking to use the cocoa management system and cocoa management and traceability system that they had developed even before they were developing before the EUDR came into force to want to address some of the requirements of the EUDR. So there isn't a kind of a composite intentional kind of system being put in place to meet the EUDR, but they are picking and choosing from a range of activities or strategies that they are implementing. Once again, that goes to the core fundamental failures of the EUDR structure, that there isn't in country, there isn't any intentional processes going on to meet the EUDR requirements, and that for us is one of the bottlenecks we know, and I am part of some of those processes that the EU has given funds to the FAO, to the EFI, to the GIZ and other bodies to support some of the activities that Ghana is undertaking. But once again, they are only on need basis and they are not comprehensive enough to bring all stakeholders together to work towards developing our systems to meet the EUDR requirements. And for us, that is one of the fundamental failures. And because of that, the kind of legislative reforms, policy reforms, structural reforms that we envisaged under the implementation of the EUDR, we are not getting it. We are not getting those reforms that we wished for, but rather the Cocoa Board and the authorities or government is picking and choosing which implementation strategies and approaches to use, and we cannot say anything. I mean, we are it's not like we are forbidden, but there is no mechanism to really push forward because for a long time that has been what they have been doing, and we have not been able to get an opportunity to call for a reform. And we thought the EUDR would have provided that opportunity, but because of the structure of it, we are not getting that opportunity. Then again, in Ghana, the regulation has taken the burden. One of the most interesting things happening in Ghana is that the regulator, in this case, Cocoa Board, has assumed the responsibility of being the producer, in that they are saying that they will absorb the cost that will go to the smallholder, i.e. mapping of their farms, getting the geolocations of their farms, and all the accompanying data that the smallholder or the producer, in this case, the farmer, was supposed to generate. The Cocoa Board has taken that responsibility upon themselves to generate that data. The challenge thereof is that who owns the data? How do we access the data? As farmers, as cooperatives? That is one of the problems and the challenges that we are having. And again, what is also bringing, what this process has brought about is the head-on collision between the private sector and then the state regulator in Ghana. And last week, there was an EU-sponsored stakeholder meeting. And guess what? The WCF boycotted it. They did not come. Only a few of the chocolate companies came. Their reason being that they do not kind of support and respect the processes that the regulator is undertaking, because the regulator is assuming the role that the private sector thought they were supposed to play in getting the data, verifying the data, and making the data and meeting all the due diligence requirements. And these are some of the emerging implementation bottlenecks that are coming up. Probably to wrap up, I will look at what all this means for the smallholder farmer in Ghana. And once again, I will revert to the work that was done by IDF, our colleagues in Cote d'Ivoire, that looked at the true cost or the cost of implementation to the farmer, and in this case, to the smallholder farmer. And we realized that when the EUDR is implemented to the letter, the worst affected will be the smallholder farmer in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in most producer countries. But unfortunately, there isn't enough safeguards in the EUDR currently to absorb some of those potential challenges that will come to the smallholder. In the afternoon, I saw that when our colleague from the rubber sector was presenting, he did highlight on the potential bottlenecks or the challenges to the smallholder, i.e. there's a possibility that they will not have access to the EU market because their commodities might not meet the EU requirements. So there is a real potential that the livelihoods of smallholder farmers will be cut off because of the implementation of the EUDR, and there are no systems in place and safeguards in place to support them. And for us, that is one of the very, very important challenges that we are facing. We have attempted to engage the EU to look at what are some of the structures or things they could put in place to support the smallholder farmer. Just as Julia was mentioning, we saw that there's a need for training, a comprehensive capacity development and training for the smallholder farmer. Right now, as we speak, there are no funds to do all that. The little that we're able to get, we are getting some small support from GIZ through the EU to train a few. There are about 800,000 farmers. Only about 100,000 will benefit from these trainings. But by December this year, the EUDR is coming on stream, and they'll be required to meet the needs or the requirements, the due diligence requirements, and they are ignorant of what they need to do. And so there is that which needs to be filled. And the EU, the Cocoa Board, and others need to step up and fill that gap. Unfortunately, as we speak, we are in June. As we speak, there is no concrete plans to fill that gap. Again, Cocoa Board wants to have all the data. What are the mechanisms for assessing the data? Will there be a cost to assessing the data? How will they manage the data? All that information is not clearly defined. And so the smallholder farmer whose farm is mapped, whose biodata is taken and stored in a certain space, do not have access to that data, cannot control the data, and that is a fundamental problem. And we have tried to address those problems, but unfortunately, there isn't a lot of spaces for dialoguing to address some of these issues. So fundamentally, from us as producer countries, there were a lot of lessons we could have picked from the FLEG VPA implementation and the structure, but we didn't pick those lessons, and we have gone ahead with a regulatory framework that is not creating that platform for in-country multi-stakeholder discussions to resolve the fundamental problems of the cocoa sector, especially in Ghana. So these are but a few of the points I want to make, and I'm more than happy to respond to any questions or follow-up that will come up. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Obed. There will indeed be a lot to discuss. Okay, before I open up to questions and comments for Julia and Obed, I have a question that Joanne has asked me to ask people in the room. How many people will need taxis at the end of the session to go back to your hotels? If you can put your hands up. Great. Yeah.
So we need two.
Okay, so we need two taxes. Okay, can I see who would like to ask any questions or make comments on the presentations? Also, people online can put their hands up. Maybe we can move to the yeah, okay, I see Janina and Pablo. And Joanne, were you putting your hand up? Okay, so let's start with Janina and then Pablo. Katerina, I see you online.
Yes, thanks so much. I was wondering, we heard this morning from the European Commission, DG INPA, about the Team Europe initiatives that sounded like they had a lot, like millions of euros available for specific types of projects in different producing countries. And I was wondering whether you're already seeing, like to both of the speakers, you're already seeing that these types of initiatives are actually addressing some of the issues of producing country support that you highlighted, and to what extent like they are sort of active on the ground versus still in the process of building up, and whether the timing is sufficient for these initiatives to actually have the impact that they're intending to.
Okay, Pablo?
Yes, this is more a question to Julia because she's making the case about the importance to build this public traceability system. So I was wondering to what extent that has to be aligned with efforts of governments also to advance and make transparent information on legal tenure. I think in Ghana, probably that not be the case, that smallholders, they have to demonstrate tenure because it seems that they just have to produce in authorized areas, but that's not going to be the case in many other contexts in which if they want to comply with legal regulations, they have to demonstrate legal tenure. And in Indonesia, probably we are also going to have that discussion. And then a small comment, probably I would like to take a look again at your data on trade and deforestation exposure from the EU, because there's something odd in that data. It doesn't align with what we do know, that the highest exposure is soy and
yeah, I mean, maybe when we give you the floor back, Julia, you can show that slide. We did have a couple of presentations in the morning, which also focused on these issues. I'm not sure whether they produced different results or not. Joanne, do you want to ask something? Okay, so Katarina, why don't you come on?
Yes, hello. Thank you both for the presentation. My question is for Julia. Regarding the national traceability systems, because I do see a lot of the advantages that you also highlighted, but I have heard a lot of concerns, especially from the private sector, on national traceability systems, that they are not transparent in how they are developed, and that there might be a lot of corruption that are implemented or incorporated in these systems, and that in the end it will be the companies who are liable for it. So there's a lot of concerns around these systems, and I would be interested in hearing your take on these concerns.
Okay, and before I don't see any other hands, but I know that's actually Julia. Before I hand the floor over, just one question, which could be for either Obed or Julia or both, and that is about the so-called cocoa talks that the EU had been holding, I guess in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. We heard earlier today a presentation from the Global Platform on Sustainable Natural Rubber, which said, oh, you know, we would like to have something like that also in rubber. And if I recall correctly, Fern published something about the cocoa talks, assessing them, and you know, what their contribution could be. So maybe it would be worth just a few words also, maybe Obed, from your point of view about these talks with which the EU was involved in, and what they contributed or didn't contribute. So Julia, let me turn it over to you. When you respond to Pablo, maybe you can also show your slide, and Pablo can say whether he sees some discrepancy from his own trade figures he presented in the morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot. First, I just wanted to raise a point to clarify something that Obed has said, because I think not everybody is aware, but actually the EU has approved the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive just a few weeks ago, and it does actually contain very strong language on the right to an adequate standard of living and purchasing practices. So the scope has been narrowed a bit in terms of the size of companies covered, but it does actually cover all of the big players in the cocoa sector. So I think in the end, the result is quite good, and I think it's something that we should use in the future to try to hold companies accountable for the low price that they're paying for cocoa. So to get onto the other questions that were asked, I think I will share the screen again. I think that the reasons, and I was also surprised by this data, the reasons why different data will have different results is because of different definitions that are used.
Maybe we can't do this because we're losing you.
Will need to, when I'm not, hang on just a second, there we go.
Sorry, Julia.
I will need to go back and check what Trace provided in writing, sorry, at the same time.
Yeah, don't try to share your screen because your bandwidth your connection can't support it. But maybe.
Yeah. So in any case, I think what I should do. Yeah, sure. Are you using my phone connection as well? No. Okay, good. I think, okay. I think it would be even better that you get in touch with Trace, because they will be able to explain to you. They had an explanation for why the figures differ from data that they themselves have produced in the past. I think they feel their latest methodology is better. And
turn off the camera.
Yeah, maybe you should just turn off your camera, because at the moment, we're not seeing you. Okay.
Okay. Oh. I'm now on Minang's phone, so computer. Let's just try this. So just to go back to the other questions that were asked. So there was a question about, yes, the how much is the how successful have been some of the initiatives that have been announced by the EU, like the Team Europe initiatives. Are we already seeing impacts? It's too early to say. The big package that they announced was only in December. It's definitely way too late, especially given the short implementation period for the EUDR. This is something that they should have started doing quite a few years ago. They could see the regulation coming. That is focused more on Indonesia. I think Minang may be able to say if any impacts have been seen so far. I would say that in the cocoa sector, where it has been around for a bit longer, Obed can speak to this much more than me, but I do think that there has been some progress, and our analysis says more. Just in the fact of having a dialogue is useful. There's been some progress on forest and land use maps that have been produced in both Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And there's a lot of work that has been done on the national cocoa traceability systems. That's a question that I have for Obed, is how, recently I've been hearing some quite good things from COCOBOD about the openness of the traceability system to the role of NGOs. And they also say that they've been talking to you guys quite a lot. So I'm interested to know, how accurate is that? Do you feel like the door has opened a little bit with COCOBOD, specifically with regards to the cocoa traceability system, which I would see as the most obvious entry point and potentially a place where the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative might have made some progress, although more in Ghana than in Cote d'Ivoire, from what we hear from the CCC. I think what's missing is that there is no direct support to smallholder cooperatives that I can see in the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative. And that's a very obvious and urgent place where support could be provided, is just directly to fund the cooperatives to do traceability stuff. And that's not anywhere that I've seen. There was another question on, yeah, very good question on aligning traceability systems with efforts of governments to work on tenure. Yeah, I think that that potentially the development, the traceability requirements and the development of geolocation could be an opportunity to sort of speed up or give more priority to tenure registration. And a government could choose to include tenure in a national traceability system, but that would sort of be up to the government and what issues they want to track. I did hear at some point that in Ghana, they were looking at conducting land interest registration at the same time as mapping the polygons. But again, Obed, would be great to hear from you if that's happening or not. It seems like an obvious opportunity, but like, yeah, I'm not sure how much that's being acted upon. And then finally, there was a comment about the national traceability systems and whether companies can trust them. Yeah, that's very true. Companies are who is liable for EUDR implementation. And so if the systems are not trusted by companies, they won't use them. Our paper goes into much more detail on this, but this is why we provide a set of criteria for a credible traceability system. And one of them is very much transparency of data. And another one is that there's been kind of multi-stakeholder validation of the system and evaluation of the system going forward. And that is precisely to address this issue of credibility from companies' side, but also it's important that civil society has the opportunity to shape and monitor the traceability system. And that's been something that's been quite important in the progress under flagged VPAs is you really need to have more than just the government looking at this traceability system. I feel like the COCOBOT has become more open to this, but again, I'm not sure. So yeah, and I think one recommendation we've made in our paper is that the EU, if there are national traceability systems that are robust and they are credible and they're transparent and they meet the criteria we put in the paper, the EU should give some kind of weight to those systems in the benchmarking that they do to countries. And that could help incentivize companies to sort of rely on and support those systems, whereas otherwise they are only incentivized to trace their own supply chains. Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. So Obed, why don't you respond briefly to the questions that Julia posed, if you want to say something about your perspective on the EU COCO talks, that would be interesting too.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So maybe I will pick the COCO talk question first. Yes, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Cameroon were involved in the COCO talks. Currently, there were two of them. One was happening in Brussels, then the others were happening in country. So they were in-country COCO talks. I'm sad to say that what we were informed or the outcome of the COCO talks did not directly go to inform how the EUDR was structured or was developed. But they happened in parallel whilst the EUDR conversations were happening in Brussels. The COCO talks during the COVID era were also happening in countries. When the COCO talks came up with very, very interesting nationally agreed action points. In the case of Ghana, there is a cocoa monitor that is to be established, but that is not connected to the EUDR. That is purely an outcome of the COCO talks, and then stakeholders agree that let's have a cocoa monitor. And even as we speak right now, it has not been implemented because of several reasons, funds and who should own it and all those processes. So yes, the COCO talks happened. They were very, very informative. They brought stakeholders together to discuss issues, to come up with strategies in addressing some of the problems in country. But unfortunately, they were in parallel with the EUDR and they did not converge. As a city, I've not seen a convergence with the outcomes of the COCO talks and the EUDR implementation modality. So that would be my take on the COCO talks. On the issue of EU making resources available, to the best of my recollection, during the last COCO talk, the ambassador to Ghana at that time announced that there was a 25 million euro money that was made available to the JRC, the EFI, FAO, and the GIZ. That is the only fund that I'm aware of. And in implementing or in rolling out programs or activities with these funds, it has resided in these organizations to determine how they want to use those funds. And for example, in the case of the EFI, they are working very closely with the COCOBOT to support in the cocoa management system development. And right now they are testing the system in 2 cocoa districts. So that is the extent to which some of these resources go. They are not going to fund the main stakeholders in the system, i.e. civil society, farmers, and even the government, to be able to put up a national traceability system that we are all. And I know that in Ghana, the national traceability system is being developed with a loan from the African Development Bank and the World Bank. And so that is what I can say with resources coming to producer countries. Probably the last point to address Julian's question of the cocoa traceability system in Ghana, what my opinion on it. Yes, I am a member of the committee, the civil society government committee that is working on the cocoa management system, especially the traceability part. We have had several engagements with the cocoa board. And that is what I said during my submission, that unfortunately the private sector has deliberately decided not to participate in the process, and especially the WCF that is representing the private sector in Ghana. They have deliberately decided not to take part, with the reason we know the reason, because the reason emanated from the CFI, the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, when we're supposed to develop these maps. We realized that most of the maps that the private sector were holding, some of them were in protected areas, and they demanded that we develop a system to be able to address, I've forgotten the name that they gave to the system, but a stakeholder system that will deal with those farms that were in protected areas. And because of that, they fail to share their data. And I know this is an international platform, and I'm ready to, because I was the co-chair of that committee, and they failed to share their data when we requested for it. And so the government had to go to the field to gather their own data. And to the best of my knowledge, as a part of the cocoa management and traceability system, the government has demonstrated traceability, transparency with us, civil society. They have invited private sector to come on board, but to the best of my knowledge, once again, private sector has not really taken that opportunity. Last week, there was a meeting to adore that system. Private sector deliberately stayed out of it. So that for us as civil society, we and of course we don't have access to the whole system, but the little that we have seen, it has shown transparency, it has shown the trustworthiness of the data. And so yes, we can speak to the trustworthiness of the data, but private sector still don't want to be part of the process. And that is where I believe the question should be going to them, why they don't want to be part of the national traceability system. Because we know that when we limit traceability to supply chains, specific supply chains, there are a lot of leakages that will happen within the system. But when you have a national system, it encompasses everybody. So that would be my quick response to those questions.
Thanks so much, Obed. Okay, now we're going to shift gears, go around the world, and we're going to look at another very important country for deforestation and for the EUDR, which is Indonesia. We're going to start with a presentation from Ahmed Mayudi, who's here in the room, and then we will go on to the presentation from Marty Minangsari. So, Ahmed, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for inviting me to come to this important workshop. I have some slides in the computer, I think.
No,
I'm
don't.
not going to do it, don't worry. Petrovari slides. Thank you very much. Should be simple. There you go. Simple when you know how. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you have to move here.
Sure.
Yeah, please. And so when you want to just use the button to move, advance the slides.
Yeah, sorry for the technicalities. In this afternoon, I would like to share some early views from Indonesia on EUDR, and then some policy, recent policy development responding the policy. But before that, I would like to give some experience from Indonesia regarding the SPLK, the legality and sustainability system. This morning, I just found this accidentally in my backpack. This is a small gift from the minister, the Minister of Forestry and Environment. This is a souvenir with legal timber here, legal wood here. It was made by small scale artisan, facilitated by the minister. So this, I think, gives you some flavor how proud are Indonesians, or not Indonesian, maybe the government with the system. Yeah, because I myself wrote some paper about some limitation of SPLK, but overall I think we can say many or most stakeholders are quite proud with the system. Yeah, before that, I would like also to give some brief presentation on the extent of land and forest cover and deforestation in Indonesia, because it is important to understand the policy responses and then the views on the EUDR. I divided into 4 areas: political views, legal views, technical views, and socio-economic views and responses. So this is the extent of forest and land and forest in Indonesia. This is basically decided in 1980s when the government, specifically the Ministry of Forestry, released so-called consensus-based forest planning. Although it is consensus-based, but it was defined by the Ministry of Forestry, of course. But the problem was, and the problem still there right now, that the government gazetted permanent forests, roughly 60% of Indonesian land, but not all of the forests are forested. I mean, not all forest land are forested. At the same time, non-forest zone, some of them forested. So we can see here, non-forest area, APL, we call it APL. It is composed by 2, state land and then private land. Many of them forested. But at the same time, we can see here, the forest area, the forest zone, not all of them forested. We can see here the percentage less than only 80% or 60%. This is the I think one of the roots of the problem regarding EUDR later on. And also here, just to give you some idea about the trend of deforestation in Indonesia. This number are from the government, so we have to be careful with this. I think the number is quite conservative, but I think it cannot be denied that there are some significant effort to slow down the deforestation. We can see here clearly the total of deforestation composed by the in forest zone or forest area and non-forest area. So deforestation also occurred in non-forest zone at the same time in the forest zone. One of the driver of deforestation, oil palm. So we can see here the trend of oil palm right now roughly 15 million hectares. And the problem is that roughly 3.5 million. Yeah, 3.5 million of the oil palm are in forest zone. Yeah, whether it was forested or not, yeah, it was forested or not, but the reality is 3.5 million hectares of the oil palm located in forest zone, either production forest, conservation forest, and protection forest. We can find everywhere. Yeah, this is just to get the trend of forest oil palm in forest zone. And here, just to give you some ideas on the initiative to ensure legality and forest sustainability in Indonesia. So after the FSC established in 1993, the government and the business sector supported the establishment of the Indonesian Eco-Labeling Institute, just as a competitor of FSC. But later on, the Indonesian system, the LEI, moved away from the government, so becoming independent body. So that's why the government in 2002 introduced its own mandatory system, PSPL. Yeah, PSPL. PSPL is kind of sustainable forest management certification. It is imposed to all of forest operation in Indonesia. Yeah, PSPL. That was in 2002. But after this, we saw some development of the legality from 2004 to 2009 to develop the SPLK. The legality system, it was stipulated in the regulation in 2009. And then in SPLK, there are two sets of standards. The first is standard of legality. The second is the standard of sustainability. So the legality, the PSPL is merged into the SPLK system. So recently the government renamed the system, the SPLK, into legality and sustainability assurance system because of this. And then the government obliged all of the obliged the exporter must get the legality verification for exporting all of the export, not only to the EU but also to the all countries. Yeah, and at the same time also the government gives some concession to the forest operation. You can apply for legality first or directly to sustainability. Yeah, but when you apply for legality, and then your legality certificate already expired, you have to apply for the sustainability certification. This is the system introduced in Indonesia. And from this we can see some promising development regarding the uptakes of PLK and PHPL certification. This data is not so new. We got until 2020, but the message is that we can see here that the adoption, the uptakes of legality verification increase over time, and also at the same time PHPL increase over time. So right now more than 300 concessions in Indonesia already certified according to the PHPL or sustainability certification with standard from the government, of course. Yeah. And also on the right hand side, you can see here in SPLK or in PSPL there are three grades. Yeah, grade A, grade B, grade C. Grade A, the top grade. Yeah, the top grade. So most of the certified concession obtain the highest grade. So this is the situation regarding VLK and PHPL certification. So how about the impact of FLEXT and SVLK on domestic government? So basically, national stakeholder valued the multi-stakeholder processes in SVLK development as a strength of SVLK because it was developed more than a decade or 15 years, involving various stakeholder, NGOs, government, academics, business, and also smallholder as well. They were involved in establishing the system, including specifying the criteria and indicator. And we found from our interview with different stakeholders, they feel that there have been more coherent and harmonized policies. For example, between forest and trade policies, simplified administrative procedure, coherence between central and local policies. And stakeholder we interviewed considered SPLK to have fostered legality compliance in the timber value chains, and more consistent audit among certifiers, although greater public participation in monitoring is said would increase the value of. So there's still some issues in the public participation in monitoring the system. And the national stakeholder also considered SPLK to have provided enabling condition for wise and sustainable forest management, but improvement needed to fully promote governance reform and forest sustainability. Synchronized with other policy initiative would increase the value of SPLK. For example, synchronization with social forestry policies, REDD+ policy, follow netting policy, and so on. We can say that the SPLK and PSPL disconnected right now is disconnected from the other policies. So some stakeholders said that we need to synchronize the SPLK with the other policy programs. Because of this, I have interviewed, I think, top official, the minister, DGs, and ambassador, like ambassador of Indonesia to Germany and to the EU, that the government said that or consider EU didn't make the promises in the VPA. This is they clearly said like this, and then also EU changed the goalpost. This is exactly what they said. Yeah, this is exactly what they said. In contrast to the Indonesian effort to improve the domestic forest governance through SPLK and PSPL. And the government and also operator dissatisfied with the EU regarding the limited concrete action to promote the FLEXT license products. For example, the ambassador of Indonesia for the Germany in Berlin said that it is frustrating that even the government they do not know about the SPLK. I mean, the government in some states in Germany, as the ambassador said, that they do not know anything about SVLK. So this is what makes the government quite frustrated with the FLEXT and SVLK and PSPL. And also most stakeholders saw it as another form of barrier, but few stakeholders observe this as another window for of opportunity to enhance the government reform. Because of this, the government of Indonesia, together with some producer, the government of some producer countries like Ghana, Cameroon, and Guyana, initiated some kind of new policy response, creating broader market recognition. I attended the meeting or the discussion in London and in Bali. The delegates from the I think 6 government. I think Indonesia, Guyana, Ghana, Cameroon, DRC. The other one I forgot. But the idea is because of the limited concrete positive impact of the flash tea, they're trying to use the legality system to penetrate in other market. And some discussion from the government of Indonesia also had some discussion with the government of China regarding the use of SSBLK for I don't know, but I don't know exactly right now the current development. But I was involved in some policy discussion with the government of China regarding in case that SPLK can be accepted as a proof of a good forest management from Indonesia. This is the views or issues with regarding the legal aspect. The government saw that the cutoff date is reasonable. We don't need, this is what the government said, we don't need to be worried about the cutoff date. But the thing is the future legal deforestation, because as I presented in the table of the forest zone, there are some I mean that the government gazetted also forest can be converted, yeah. Some I think 20 million hectare can be converted in the future legally, yeah, legally. For example, for the strategic national project like geothermal infrastructure, like right now in the IKN, in the national capital, and also for example for social forestry program, tenure reform. So this is will be facilitated by the forest area that can be converted, yeah. The issue of forested but non-forested, yeah. Because it is non-forest zone, so but it is non-forest zone usually used for other purposes, so can be converted in Indonesia, but right now is forested. This is the issue, an issue. And also another issue is non-forest commodities in forest zone, agroforestry. And also I mentioned oil palm in forest zone. This is the, I think the elephant in the room, I think. That's the government trying to I think in the over the past 2 years or 3 years, the government tried to solve the problem of oil palm in the forest zone by enriching the area with other forest species. This is the some policy responses from Indonesia. It also interesting regarding the operationalization of risk category. So the government is what the government said usually that there must be difference between products. So for example, in the context of timber, Indonesia should be categorized as low risk. This is because of the significant effort made in the timber sector, but maybe not in oil palm. So this must be differentiated between product, not as a country as a whole. And this is the and also the government is quite doubtful with the map used by the EU. I don't know the map. Might be you Alfro or something like that. I forgot the name.
I think this is the map that Gert was talking about.
Yeah.
This is the the global map of forests in 2020, which is meant to be a kind of benchmark for how much deforestation there was before the act came into effect.
Yeah, I guess also this map, but I forgot. But I attended a policy discussion, I think just 2 weeks ago. Just 2 weeks ago, that the presentation from the DG, forest planning DGs, they said that the map is not so reliable. It's not so reliable compared to the map produced by the Indonesian government. So I think the government are trying to ensure that our map is much better than the map from the AU. Geotagging also an issue, big issue for smallholder. Indeed, this is quite difficult for a smallholder with 1 hectare, 2 hectares to do this kind of things. This is the technical issues regarding the EUDR and in Indonesia.
Let's see what happens if we tell them okay, no, but you have somehow clicked on.
Oh,
unchecked.
yeah.
That was the problem. Okay, let's see if it will now move.
Yeah. I think this is the last slide from me. Views and responses regarding the EUDR, the socio-economic aspect. Smallholder is the elephant in the room because, for example, in oil palm, more than 50% of the oil palm in Indonesia smallholder. Cacao, coffee, more than 90%. More than 90% cacao and coffee smallholder. So this is the issue. I think from the morning we talk about the smallholder. It is also evident in Indonesia that we need to be careful with the livelihood of smallholder because of the extent of smallholder in Indonesia. I think this is all my presentation, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Great overview of the issues. So let's stop your sharing. But okay, good. Okay. And now we're going to turn to Minang. I think there's some things in the chat, though. I just want to see what the chat is doing. Okay, but I'm not seeing it.
I can maybe explain. It was just I wanted to explain the difference in the data. I found the explanation from Trace to the person who asked about why there was so much cocoa in the slide that I showed. So I can summarize if you want. Trace is using an updated underlying data set to link deforestation to specific crops. And they're using more advanced method, more accurate spatial attribution with high resolution maps of cocoa overlaid with maps of deforestation, which shows that cocoa is a more important contributor. Previously, it was based on less accurate statistical modeling in this region. So it's basically a combination of more recent data and improved methods that explains why it's different from other data that we've had previously.
Okay, great. Thank you. Minang, would you like to give your presentation, and we can open up to discussion?
Okay, let me try to share my screen, if I can.
Yeah, okay.
Hang on a second. Oh, here. Can you see it?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So so this is the last presentation. So actually, I think quite a lot has already been said. So it's just for the EUDR, we all heard from Julia and all. How do we move this? Okay. So what is it? What does it do? This one is outlines obligation for operators of placing commodity products on the EU market and will be implemented on 30th of December 2024. So basically, the diligence statement, you already know, contains the information on legality and confirm that it's from deforestation-free plot of lands, and it's has to be able to demonstrate the traceability up to the specific land where it was produced. Hang on, how do I? Yeah. So scope of commodities, we have 5 of these are produced in Indonesia and exported to the EU on a very different level, volume. So we have timber, coffee, cacao, palm oil, and rubber. So EU is a quite crucial market for Indonesian commodities, mostly wood and palm oil. And between 2020 and 2022, Indonesia was the EU's 7th largest trading partner for woods and the 2nd largest export market for Indonesian CPO. So this like a diagram of the percentage of EU import from Indonesia. So almost 80% of palm oil accounts for almost 80%, followed by timber, rubber, coffee, and cacao is quite small, but it is on a growing trend. This is for the CPO. For Indonesia from 2020 to 2022, India is the biggest market, followed by the EU 27. We have Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain as the major importers of Indonesian CPOs. And then Kenya, Malaysia, Singapore, and Pakistan. So up until 2022, actually China is not even the big 5 of Indonesian importer of CPO. And this is for the wood export. So the exported products dominated by furniture, and this is mainly produced by smallholders, SMEs, in Indonesia, followed by panel, paper, woodworking, crafts, and veneer. So how is it the situation in Indonesia? Pak Maryudi has already explained a lot about the SVLK, so I won't repeat. For palm oil, Indonesia has been implementing the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil (ISPO) mandatory certification since 2011, and there are lots of policies and initiatives have been carried out for strengthening SVLK, the ISPO. We have a moratorium on new palm oil permit from 2018-2021, a permanent moratorium on peatland and primary forest permit, peatland restoration, reforestation, social forestry. The STDB, this is registering palm oil farmers. And then we have also National Action Plan for Sustainable Palm Oil, the FOLU Netsing 2030, and others. So these are all policies and initiatives that have been issued by the Indonesian government to address some of the climate issues, if you like, from the forest and land use. But we also still have challenges. So illegal logging and forest encroachment are still ongoing, despite to a lower level, rate, and also planned deforestation under Indonesia's legal framework. We still have problematic licensing and overlapping of licenses. And also some implementational challenges of SVLK and ISPO, including violation of legality and sustainability standards, as well as handling of complaints. Also, lack of support and facilitation for smallholders to meet sustainability requirements, especially in terms of fulfilling legality aspects. Overall, transparency of data is still lacking, especially in palm oil. So even though we have two national system, mandatory national system for two major commodities, but palm oil is still very much lacking if we compare it to SVLK. Until now, there is no functioning information system whereby we can see like even the total number of plantations or companies certified is different depending on who you ask, let alone some public summary on each company. So it's totally different from SVLK, where we can expect like almost 100% of that kind of information available for public. Also, there is lack of coordination both horizontally among relevant ministries and also vertically between the central and subnational government. And also implementation of other related policies. So CSOs, majority of us seeing EUDR as an opportunity. Why? Because the EU needs producing countries to ensure that the implementation of EUDR. So means that producer countries has room for negotiation, and this has been used by Indonesia together with Malaysia. They came to the EU, I think, sometime last year, initially bringing their high call position of rejecting the EUDR, and as a result of that visit, then the EU, Indonesia, and Malaysia set up this JTF, Joint Task Force, to address some of the issues that have been raised by these two countries. So JTF, or Joint Task Force, agreed on 5 work streams that include inclusivity of farmers in supply chain, relevant national certification system, ensuring traceability and using scientific data on deforestation and forest degradation, and also addressing data protection, private data protection. So I can give an update on this as we go along. But the JTF, in the TOR, it said that it will involve multi-stakeholders, including civil society, but in reality, it's still quite limited, in terms of space for civil society to be included. But going back to the EUDR as an opportunity, we see that it provides opportunity for Indonesia to improve and strengthen forest governance, improve governance of commodity system. At the moment, like I said, we only have 2, but the other 3, they are now thinking of setting up their own system, and maybe because of the smaller scale compared to the timber and palm oil, maybe they can finish faster, And just to echo Pak Maryudi, both cacao and coffee almost exclusively smallholders. And also through the EUDR, we can promote protection of the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, the laborers and smallholders. Obviously, we're gonna need support, maybe from the EU through Indonesia EU cooperation mechanism, and these 4 opportunities, if you like, we already have so many lessons learned from implementing EU in Indonesia Flexi VPA, and by implementing this, the agricultural commodity industries will have enhanced reputation that will make them more competitive in a global market, because apart from the EU, we know that the UK and the US is they are having a similar legislation, and but using legal approach. So we can say that if you can meet EU regulation, you will certainly meet the other demand consuming countries' regulation. These are some key concerns Abed I've already mentioned from his perspective in Ghana. Also the same as in Indonesia. So first, like I said, the still limited civil society inclusion in the decision-making processes. So there are some issues of why for this EUDR talks, there it seems like a closed door. Even though in the last JTF meeting, we finally got invited, but it's after like really pushing, yeah. So for me, it's a big concerns because, like I said, we have already had experience, and they know that also Pak Maryudi said, yeah, the multi-stakeholder approach has given like credibility to the system, to the process, and why for this, so that's puzzling to a certain extent. Secondly, indigenous rights and local communities, because under the EUDR, all the legality aspect is according to the national regulation, and for countries who don't have regulation upholding the rights of communities and indigenous peoples, it's gonna be it's gonna be still a struggle, to ensure this FPIC, for example, or preventing human rights violations that Indonesia is currently suffering in, if we look at the practices of big oil palm companies or plantations. The third is support for smallholders. We need support measures to ensure compliance or to help them transition, to meet the requirement of EUDR and to prevent exclusion from the EU market. The next one is the traceability, cost, and the complexity of this traceability system. The high cost and complexity of traceability could affect implementation because and could negatively impact smallholders because they can be excluded because they are not seen as a preferable supplier of raw materials. Yeah, again, support measures and capacity building are needed here. And the last one is in the we are concerned of the inadequate enforcement and also monitoring, because this is especially in the EU part, because we know that even for timber, under the EUDR, it's not as satisfactory as we want it, let alone now with 7 commodities and, with the derivative products. And also transparency on the EU side, also an issue that we have been trying for them to address, and grievance mechanism and also independent monitoring also essential. So some recommendation, it's still quite high level. Obviously, cooperation and involvement of all stakeholders. We know this is very, very key. And I think if we want to ensure, I'm a bit distracted, sorry. If we want to ensure that this EUDR is and also the subsequent systems in producing countries, then there is no other choice but to involve all stakeholders. Secondly, also in the JTF, as this is like the body that that will discuss a lot of the hard issues, of all this inclusion of smallholders, transparency, traceability, the data, all this forest observatory, deforestation baseline data, and also the third one is encouraging EU to provide financial and technical support and assistance to Indonesia through a partnership. So this is going back to Julia presentation, that only throwing money to Indonesia, and here you can help this for one project supporting community smallholders in this province, and then another in to educate the public here. It doesn't have any comprehensive framework of trying to achieve all of these goals under the EUDR together with the producing countries. Yeah. So it doesn't guarantee a systemic transformation, if you like, in producer countries, because at the end of the day, for us, the civil society, it is how the EU regulation, the market or demand side measures can help producing countries transforming their sectors, and their governance of in the forest and land use sectors. The last one is to ensure robust enforcement and transparent and inclusive monitoring mechanism. So this is for the EUDR as measures coming from the market, and these are the last one is what we recommend happen in the producing country level. So it's in the national level. I will not go in details in this. You can read this listing. Basically, for us, the civil society in Indonesia, the JTF is a good platform to start having that multi-stakeholders discussion and trying to get everyone on the table. So I will welcome any question or discussion on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great ideas. So if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll then open up to the discussion. So can I see who would like? I see Pablo and Joanne immediately, and so Pablo, why don't you go ahead? I think we just, given the time, we take all the questions people want to ask, and we give the speakers a last opportunity.
Yeah, it's more like a common question, and it's connected to what, Ahmed, you were saying, that in Indonesia, there's a large number of smallholders that they have been encroaching public forest lands, which are on oil palm. And the government has been very reluctant to recognize tenure rights of those smallholders, because that would open the door to formalize encroachment of public forests, which for me has always been at the center of the problem. Because in addition, you have incentives from the government to improve practices of smallholders, but all these incentives could not be targeted to illegal smallholders. So these farmers were never able to access those financial resources. So it's not necessarily a lack of resources to support smallholders, but there is how to overcome this struggle about tenure rights of people that they have occupying those lands. And now on top of that, you have these regulations that they are asking for deforestation free, but at the same time, they are asking for importers and companies to follow the relevant legislation of the country of production. I heard companies saying that tenure is part of that relevant legislation, and they don't want to face any risk, so they are not going to source for these smallholders, which are not part of their direct suppliers, but are all those indirect suppliers, and these smallholders, they connect through informal supply chains, etc. So I would like to, but at the same time, the EU is saying, you don't necessarily, that's going to be a problem. So I don't know if you have more clarity about that, or how that has been part of these discussions of the government, how to also they want to move and start dealing with this problem of land titling of these smallholders. That's my question.
Joanne?
So it's really just a factual question. We talked a lot this morning about trade diversion, about the risk of bifurcated markets. And I'm just wondering in Indonesia, as we prepare for the entry or the application of EUDR, whether you're seeing evidence, particularly in relation to the commodities that you told us are particularly reliant on the EU market.
Okay. I have one question, or sort of pair of questions myself for both speakers. Minang, I like very much your strategy of using the EUDR as an opportunity, among other things, to upgrade both the SVLK and the ISPO. And Yuri, you have documented many of the weaknesses of the SVLK, and especially the PHPL system of sustainability certification. You've shown in your research that both the standards that are used and the rigor of the auditing system are much weaker than, for example, the Forest Stewardship Council sustainability standards for timber. The Indonesian government, I mean, already has been trying to argue with, not unreasonably, that given that the sustainability certification is mandatory for public and large forest concessions after 3 years, that the whole system could be considered a sustainability certification system. And indeed, I think they've even renamed it from SVLK to legality and sustainability verification system. So, I mean, from your point of view, Yudi, I'm interested in whether you agree with Minang's analysis that it would be possible to use the EUDR as a basis for upgrading the certification, the sustainability certification system for timber and perhaps also for palm oil. Now, Minang, the one thing, I also like your idea of using the Joint Task Force as a framework for introducing or having addressed the concerns not only of the Indonesian government, the Malaysian government, the business sectors, but also civil society. I wonder, however, whether the EU is taking this joint task force as seriously as you're taking it and are proposing to take it. So the joint task force is under the responsibility of DG Environment. I did ask Emmanuel Pito to say something about it in his presentation. He didn't refer to it. I asked Simon Gmeiner from DG Intpa to say something about it. He said, well, I can't because it is under the jurisdiction of DG Environment. And so I take, there are two things we can take from that. One is that insofar as it's DG Intpa that's responsible for the capacity building and financial support for partnerships with producer countries, they're not involved in the joint task force. And I wonder whether the joint task force's full name is Joint Task Force on Traceability and Transparency in Supply Chains, which is narrower than the agenda that Minang, you very reasonably said you would like to see from an Indonesian perspective it's addressed. So I hope that the JTF won't turn out to be a disappointment and a missed opportunity for this kind of EU producer country dialogue on making the EUDR more implementable, as Julia put it, in a just way. So maybe you can both react to that as well as the other question. So Yudi, I give you the floor first because you had several questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. I agree with Pablo regarding the encroachment of smallholder in forest for planting oil palm. But it is not only an encroachment, Pablo, because some of the people also claiming this is part of their land. So this is the problem that stem from the national what I said consensus-based forest planning, this kind of things that the government, this is gazetted as state forest zone, regardless it is owned by or controlled by local people and also indigenous communities. And For sure, the government reluctant to address this because it set a precedent for releasing the state land to the local community. This kind of things. So that's why the government focusing on improving the practice of oil palm in the forest. So this is my feeling is like that. And for Joan, regarding the EU market, I got some statement from some government official. Why do we bother with EU market? It is very small, 16% or 10%. But later they admitted that economically it's not so important, but it is politically important, this kind of things. This is the statement from the government that, for example, our export to India, our export to China, the government also might be following the game set by the EU. So this is the government trying to react the EUDR seriously, not only because of the share of market in EU. Jonathan, yes, a lot of weaknesses in SPLK and in SPLK, weaker standard auditing, and so on and so on. Yeah, I have wrote, but I got a survey I conducted last year on forest concession that have been certified by both FSC and PSPL. My question was simple. Whether you see differences in these two based on your experience, yeah, and I think 40% of the response saying that not much different in terms of the improvement they have to do in order to meet the standard of PSPL and FSC. But I'm in the position that to say that some improvement still needed. Yeah, some improvement still needed, but we cannot deny that some good progress is made by SPLK and PSPL. And also for ISPO, because of the government quite proud with the development of the multi-stakeholder processes. I think the government planning to adopt the same model for improving the ISPO certification.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Minang, I'm going to give you the last word. I think you're muted. Minang, you're muted.
Okay. Okay, Jonathan, do I have to address all four or only your question?
Address whatever you want. We've come to the
okay.
end of a long day, but we would like to hear whatever you want to tell us.
All right. So for the question on land tenure, you're right that it has been discussed for several years actually, talking about the oil palm within forest estate or forest zones, encroaching the forest zones. So there is this discussion ongoing with regard to because for this, they won't break or they won't be breaking the EUDR requirement for zero deforestation because it's all happening before end of 2020. But because they will be unable to meet the legality requirement because it's still deemed as illegal. But as far as I understand, Pak Maryudi, please correct me if I'm wrong, there has been a roadmap and also some policies of trying to that been introduced by the government, I think several years ago. It's called Jangka Benar for smallholders. So basically, the route that the government take, in this case, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, is to release the forest estate to become APL, so non-forest zone. So it's it's just to legalize those, what we call keterlanjuran. So it's already happened, because a lot of that also because when they opened the forest, it hadn't been designated or decreed as forest zones. So they came first, and then the government said that, okay, this is forest zone or forest estate. So that's that kind of issue also happened in Indonesia, as I think probably you already aware. In short, so there has been some resolutions trying to the government's trying to find some resolution on this issue. We will see how it goes in the coming years, because still Jangka Benar is I think it's still in the piloting stage, yeah, Pak Maryudi, yeah? Not fully implemented for all smallholders. And then for the commodities reliant to the EU, same as Pak Maryudi, I think EU, even though it's not like the major apart from palm oil, of course, even palm oil, it's now, I think, not the second or currently, maybe the third or fourth major importer, but it's good for the business because of it giving them a better reputation, if they supply to the EU, rather than they can always sell to India or other emerging market, but it's about reputation also. So that's why Maryudi say that it is political, yeah, because of that, practically. And whether or not we can use EUDR to strengthen SVLK and ISPO, actually, it's kind of already happening at the moment, because SVLK is now undergoing a discussion to improve their standards to include traceability and geolocation, as well as having a provision whereby for plantation forests, like for pulp, or chipwood, not to open the still forested area within their concession. But this will need a lot of discussion at the moment. I think the government, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, is still on the consultative processes, because it will mean to maybe they have to do like land swap, and it has its own consequences, but yeah, it's a work in progress. As well as the ISPO, because ISPO is also there is ongoing discussion to strengthen the ISPO. A study has been commissioned, and the result has also been out, even though it's not made public yet, to see the gap between ISPO and the requirement of EUDR. Ministry of Agriculture is also on discussion on how to bridge this gap, or whether it's possible if we look at the Indonesian legal framework, whether we have to change the law. And if you understand the Indonesian situation, we are like in the transition period at the moment, with new government coming in, in October. So again, it's also a work in progress, but ISPO already, was it last year, I have already attended a consultation of ISPO regulation, the improved ISPO regulation that will include the downstream industries. So instead of only under the Ministry of Agriculture, now it will include the Ministry of Industry, as well as the Ministry of Mineral and Energy, because we know that the palm oil plantation in Indonesia also processed to become a biofuel, yeah. So it will be like overarching umbrella for a certification of palm oil in Indonesia. So yes, EUDR has that kind of impact already. So even though we don't know the outcome yet, but even having this discussion, moving along, to improve the current system, I think is a good indicators that it has some impact already. And whether or not EU genuinely wants to use JTF to address some issues, that is a $1 million question. Because like I said, the EU, we have asked this question to the EU, both the Commission and also the delegation, whether or not they want to use lessons from VPA, in the EUDR regime, and repeatedly saying that there is no intention to have bilaterals with Indonesia under EUDR. It's purely B2B. However, last week during the World Water Forum, apparently the DG Environment, Florica, came to that conference and met with the Vice Minister of Environment and Forestry, Aludohong. So they had a good. It was reportedly they have had a good discussion, and that the EU said that they are committed to support SVLK's improvement to meet the EUDR requirement to strengthen the standards. But as you know, because politically Indonesia is against EUDR, so this is led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yeah. So no communication whatsoever could come out of that important meeting, that will, actually send a good signals, but, setting aside of, but it happened. And then in Jakarta, DG Florica also met with the Bu Musdalifa, which is the Deputy Minister of Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, who is also leading the EUDR work in Indonesia, the JTF. Also confirming the same kind of commitment to support Indonesia's ISPO and palm oil sector. So that's a good change of approach, if you like. So now they are more consultative instead of patronizing, and imposing. So we will see how it goes. For us, it will CSOs. Jonathan will have to knock every time, because from both from Indonesia government, like I said, it's a mind-boggling why they won't use us to advance like this or sustain this progress. But yeah, we will work to find that space.
Thank you so much, Binang. I think we really now have to go, but this was a great conclusion. Thanks both to you and Judy, and to Julia, who I think is still here. Let's have a round of applause for the speakers. And tomorrow we'll resume at 9 o'clock, looking at the legitimacy and effectiveness of the EUDR. So thanks to everybody who stuck it out to this point.